I don't remember much from my childhood. I lived in a small town south of Krakow with my mom, dad, and 2 sisters. Those early days are a blur, but I remember going door to door around the neighborhood, asking for treats during the Dzinki Harvest Festival. It was a tradition of ours since we knew the neighbors always bought too much candy. We would gather leftovers and make a feast of our own. At every door, you were greeted with a cheeky smile as the neighbors lovingly cussed out the scoundrel children of the Dabrowski home. Of course, happy memories are happy for a reason, because things get worse and you get something to compare them to. My parents separated. My mother moved to Warszawa, where we could be closer to my grandparents and uncles. Meanwhile, my father, Jaromir, did his best to stay in our lives, but it got harder and harder. He needed to work longer and longer hours, but he still sent us money every month. He wanted us to have a beautiful life, even if he couldn't be there for it. With every passing year, those visits grew further and further away. First, we lost Easter, and then Christmas, and then the birthdays. And finally, our yearly Dzinki festival meetup. And last that we heard of him, he was barely making ends meet. He wasn't sending money anymore, and over time, he disappeared into memory. My mother remarried and my sisters graduated. My older sister moved to Ljubljana while my younger went to Munich. My mother stayed in Warszawa with her new husband, but once the kids were out of the picture, she moved into her summer home up north. I love my mother dearly, but she's always had an eye for the luxurious, always planning the next trip, the next sun-baked afternoon. I stayed in Warszawa. I got myself a degree in sociology and managed to hold on to a low-ranking government job overseeing private claims. It wasn't glamorous, it was mostly being yelled at in different ways, but it paid the bills. A mind-numbing battle of making decisions, defending them, and then making them again. The year I turned 24, I got a letter from an estate lawyer. Turns out my father had passed away. This wasn't recent. According to the papers, he had passed away several years ago. Some kind of accident with farm equipment. He didn't have a proper will, and dividing the estate among his living descendants hadn't been a state priority. It got lost in a folder somewhere, and now it had floated back up. They had divided everything equally between me and my sisters. My youngest sister got his savings. My oldest got his car and valuables, and I got the house. I called the others to check who wanted to go see his grave, and nobody wanted to. They were all tangled up with their own lives and their troubles. My family were under the impression that my father had abandoned us, and this was a way for us to abandon him back. I had a different impression. I always thought that he was just working too hard. I decided I would take some time off work to collect his things and check out the property, trying to get a better idea of why he had distanced himself from us, and maybe I could get a better picture of my early life, that time where I was greeted with a smile rather than a complaint. It was a long drive. The roads out there aren't the best. It's a very small community with no more than about 250 people, most of which are wheat farmers, and there's not that much to do. There are only 2 things other than farms, a church and a store. Everything else is either too far away or too irrelevant. And going past the endless fields, I got so lulled into a rhythm that I almost missed the exit. It's so small that you can accidentally pass it by if you don't take the right turn. There are no signs. You can only recognize it from the church in the distance. I took a left turn and prayed to God the suspension would hold a little bit longer. I decided to pay the old church a visit. We had spent a lot of time there. There was plenty of parking. It was smaller than I remembered, but then again, everything looked bigger back then. There's something uneasy about coming home after so long. As I stepped out of the car, it all just came back to me. The smells, the sounds. Even if you can't put your finger on it, there's something that tickles the mind as if to remind you, this is where you belong. "Welcome," a voice called out. "Sorry about the state of things." I turned around to see a man a couple of years older than myself. He had well-combed hair and thick glasses. He was wearing a priest's garb. I had almost forgot. The village priest had been old even back when I was young. No wonder there was a new one. "I'm Father Cherniak," he continued. "Are you new in town or passing through?" "I grew up here," I said. "I'm one of the Dabrowski kids." "Sorry, I'm not familiar," he smiled. "I only came here last winter to pick up the work from Father Golick." "He lived until last winter," I asked. "Are you sure?" "Quite so," he laughed. 101 years old. "Wow, I can't believe it," I smiled. "God really does have a sense of humor." Father Cherniak showed me around. He told me his plans for refurbishing the windows, but the one thing that irked him more than anything was the doors. You see, they were gone. The church was wide open. "It's a local superstition," he sighed. "A shepherd needs his gate to tend his flock. But every time I put the doors up, somebody takes them down." "Strange," I said. "I've never heard of that before." "Really, I thought you were from the area." "Guess I've been gone too long, Father." The church looked naked in a way. No barriers. I could see the gravel that they had dragged in, forgetting to wipe their feet. Father Cherniak had tried to put up some curtains, but the wind had torn them down piece by piece. Before I left, he showed me my father's grave. It had been vandalized. The headstone had tipped over and there were no flowers. I promised myself to make it a little nicer before I left, but I didn't understand. Sure, my family wasn't perfect, but we had never been hated. This grave looked outright despised. I thanked Father Cherniak and made my way across town. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. All through town, there were these wide open houses just like the church. At first, I thought it was some kind of summer cleaning going on, but no. All doors were gone. They weren't just wide open, they were removed. I could see all the way into people's living rooms. The hustle and bustle as homeowners moved from kitchen to bedroom, talking amongst themselves. I slowed down and looked a little closer. Not a single room had a door, not even the bathrooms. A couple of them had curtains or insect nets put up, but no doors. House after house, completely open to the elements. A couple of them had welcome mats by the windows in their living rooms, as if to show if that was the way to enter. A couple of them had completely bricked their entrances where their front doors used to be, sealing it. Sure, small towns can get a bit quirky, but I had never seen anything like this. I pulled up to an all too familiar driveway and I gasped. I couldn't even recognize my home. It had been vandalized, every window broken, every door removed. I could see rats scurrying around. Walking around the property, things got even worse. There had been a small fire in the backyard, spreading to the outer wall of the kitchen. It wasn't completely burned down, but you could probably punch straight through with little effort. And finally, on the far side, neon green spray paint reading, Sin Diabla, Son of the Devil. I couldn't believe it. They'd even clipped the chains off our swing set, leaving a rusted metal skeleton. It looked like somebody had tried to start a tire fire but couldn't quite get it going. I had a hard time even picturing what it used to look like. There was this bottomless hole forming in my stomach where every smile I remembered seemed like a cruel taunt. Something must have happened, something that I had never heard of. Coming back around, I noticed a crowd of middle-aged men. They were standing just outside of the property looking over my car. I didn't recognize any of them. "You at the bank?" one of them asked. "No, I'm the Dabrowski kid," I said. "The son." "You're the son?" he spat. "You want to join him in hell, is that it?" "You know who did this?" I snapped back, pointing at the house. "Was it you?" "Could have been anyone," a man in the back added. One of them gave me a knowing smile and nodded at the graffiti. They whispered something among themselves, letting out a chuckle under their breaths. They scoffed at me and wandered off, spitting curses and sneers. Not quite the welcome I had imagined. I had initially planned on sleeping in the old house, but there was no way. Not only was it wide open, but it was a disgusting mess. I'm not going to go into detail about what they had done to the place, but I'd be lucky if I was able to give it away in its current state. I decided to spend the night sleeping in my car. I leaned the seat back and wrapped myself in a blanket, hoping that it wouldn't get too cold. I spent some time on my phone, but I didn't want to use up all of the battery. But somehow I still ended up staying awake long past midnight. But there was something beautiful about that night. The sunset was one of the few things that didn't change around those parts. Watching the sun go down over the same old fields gave me that feeling that some things never change. I remember waking up sometime around 2 a.m., seemingly for no reason. It wasn't cold and there was no one bothering me and no notifications on my phone. A careful wind brushed against the hood of my car. I laid there for a moment, trying to ignore the texture of the seat sinking into my sweaty skin. I filtered out the sounds of nature bleeding in from outside. A distant part of me had heard them all before. I listened past the songbirds and the insects in the fields, and beyond that, there was something else, something in the distance. A wail, a deep, sorrowful wail. The following day, I took some time to walk around town. The rumor that Jeremir's kid was back had spread like wildfire. I could tell by the sideways looks as people passed me on the street. The only ones who didn't seem to care were the kids, and they were few and far between. At the far end of the town there was this long brick wall. It wasn't very high, but it was dense. It had doors built directly into it. Dozens of them. Every door from every house in the neighborhood. They had jammed them all straight into the brick. I couldn't see ours, though. It had an eerie look to it. Maybe 100 or more doors, all built to never be opened. I couldn't help but touch a few handles, making sure they didn't budge. There were a couple of teenage kids standing at the edge of the wall observing me. I walked up to them, surprised to see that they didn't back down. They had a cocky look to them, but at least they weren't openly hostile. Before I could say anything, they turned to me. "My mom hates you," one of them said. "What did you do?" "I used to live around here," I said. "Came to get some things." "Why'd you come back?" he scoffed. "I'm leaving the moment that I can afford it." "Same," said the other, rolling an unlit cigarette between his fingers. I gave them a tired look. A man passed us further down the street, throwing daggers at me with his eyes. Talking to the wrong person would get my teeth knocked out for sure. I turned to the kids, lowering my voice. "I'm Dabrowski's son," I admitted. "That's why they hate me." The second kid nearly dropped his cigarette. I managed to bribe them into a conversation with the promise of a six-pack from the next town over. In return, they would give me the unofficial tour of what had happened these past few years. A fair trade, I suppose. I'd apparently missed quite a lot. We wandered to the east side of town. There was an old farm that had stood there for ages. It didn't really have a name. It had just been a part of the background. It was barely even a frame anymore, just the outline of what had once been a home. It had started years ago. People heard knocking coming from that ruin. It used to have this door that still stood, clinging to the edge of a rotted out door frame. You could hear it at night, one of the kids explained. Knock knock, like a door to hell. "Sounds awful," I said. "Oh, not to everyone," the other kid sighed. "There was one guy who liked it." It wasn't a hard guess as to whom that might have been. Rumor was my dad had gone up there one night and opened the door. It had crumbled off the hinges, and according to the townsfolk, something had stepped through. Some called it the devil. A couple of kids thought that it was an alien. Most of the locals just called it Slepik. It came through when the door broke, the first kid said, and now it can't go back. So you're saying that it's still here? I asked. It's real. Well, yeah, he laughed. Why do you think this place is so messed up? Well, then what's with the doors? It's looking for a way back to hell, he said. And when it can't find the right door, it gets angry, and then it hurts people. Slepik, that's what they called it. An ugly word for a blind man or a mole. They liked to call it that because of its terrible vision, mistaking every door for the one that it was looking for. For years, Slepik had moved from house to house, knocking on every door that it could find. And if somebody opened, it would do something terrible. People had gone missing and a couple had died. I drove my adolescent guides to the other town over to get them their promised beer. They told me all they could as we went. It felt a bit weird driving off with a couple of teenagers, but I got the impression that these two had done far worse for far less. Delinquents, but honest ones at that. At first, people had hidden in their homes, but then Slepnik had knocked until the doors broke. Then it would knock on the inner doors, and so over time people removed them. Those who didn't would get a visit at some point. With all the discarded doors, they built the brick wall, tricking Slepnik into knocking around at night. This can't be true, I said. It's absurd. It's true, the first kid said. That's why they hate your dumb dad. He let him in. But it doesn't make sense. Why don't you just pack up and leave? I'm gonna, the first kid said. I told you that. The second kid pondered the question for a while and then shrugged at his friend. He answered as if he had thought about it 100 times. Everywhere is good, but home is best. Of course he would say that. Come hell or high water, home is home. I got them their 6-pack and some fast food. I got some for myself while I was at it. It wasn't a long drive all in all, but long enough to be a bother. By the time that we got back, it was almost dark. They rushed out of the car waving a hasty goodbye. As they did, the second kid called back to me. Go see for yourself, he said. Slepnik comes out at night. He pointed down the street towards the brick wall. I nodded at them in silent thanks. I didn't believe them. I had to see this for myself. If what I had heard the previous night was any indication, Slepnik would be out somewhere after midnight, and so I went to bed early. And when I say bed, I mean sleeping in my car for the second night in a row. I was miserable. I considered leaving first thing in the morning, but there was this deep sadness in me that I couldn't shake. This was my old home. I had played in these fields. It felt wrong knowing that I was no longer welcome. My dad was many things, but no devil's son. If he opened that door, it must have been for a good reason. And if he had let through something that shouldn't be here, it must have been an honest mistake. He was not an evil man, but he was fallible. Then again, maybe he didn't have a choice. Maybe Slepnik didn't give him a choice either. I must have nodded off at some point. I forgot to set an alarm, but I still woke up at 2:30 a.m. I considered going back to sleep, but I decided to have one last look around town. I had promised myself I would, so I got out of the car, stretched, and listened. It was easier that night. There was a noise that cut straight through the ambience. That wailing. It was clearer. Even in the dark, I could tell where it came from. The houses had turned off their lights, leaving the streets lit up with nothing but the moon. Still, I knew those streets. I could follow them in my sleep. I made my way to a dirt path, leading me past the 2 houses at the edge of town and straight to the brick wall. At that point, I could hear it as clear as day. It was a man wailing at the top of his lungs, crying his soul out, bawling like a child. I could see the brick wall in the distance. A sharp contour of the bricked-in doors stood out against the moonlight like a long, flat, abstract painting. And in the middle of it all, there was a dark silhouette. It looked like a man, sort of. I couldn't really tell what he was like. He had a bulky jacket on. He was pulling on one of the doors and smacking it over and over with a closed fist. It was the same pattern over and over. Pull, smack, smack. Pull, smack, smack. And in between every attempt, he jerked his head around, crying desperately. I considered walking up to him. This wasn't some kind of devil, this was a heartbroken man. As I took a few steps closer, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. A light. I turned around only to notice a small flashlight coming from one of the nearby houses. They were filming me with their phones. Looking closer, I could see two little heads peeking out, shaking their heads in a certain no. Turning back to the brick wall, I heard a sudden crack. The man had pulled one of the doors straight out of the wall. It came loose and he set it down next to him, and with one hand pushed it downward. He didn't even have a good grip, but with a single hand, he broke the door into pieces. The wailing turned into a scream. Rage, unfiltered, unhindered rage. With only his fingers, he began to rip bricks straight out of the wall, tossing them around like leaves in the wind. I could hear them landing around me, kicking up tufts of grass. I backed away as the lights in the house went out. The little heads dipped away from the window. I hurried down the dirt path as I watched Slepnik climb on top of the brick wall, screaming at the top of his lungs. Even at a distance, I could tell that something was off. His proportions seemed wrong. It was hard to tell. He had wrapped himself in some kind of dark fabric, but something about him didn't look right. I didn't stop to stare. Say what you will, maybe it was just a strange man. Either way, I was looking at something dangerous. And when the locals turn to hide, you do best to follow suit. So I hurried down the dirt path, hearing his terrifying scream echo across the fields. I barely slept that night. It's one thing to believe in monsters and another thing to see them. As soon as the sun rose, I drove off. But as I went past the church, I noticed something. There was a white van outside and one of the church doors had been put back up. There were two men on ladders getting ready to put the other door up, and it was hidden under a tarp just off to the side. I could see Father Cherniak up front with a big smile on his face. I decided to see what was going on. Surely he had to know what he was doing. The moment I parked my car, Father Cherniak waved me over. He was right next to me before my boots hit the gravel. "Welcome back," he smiled. "Glad to see you haven't left us yet." I closed the car door and yawned a little bit. "What are you doing?" I asked. "What is this?" "You inspired me. For an outsider, this place had to have looked awful. I saw it, you know. I saw it in your face." He turned back to the church as the two carpenters began tipping up the second door. "It must be dignified," he continued. "Our Lady deserves better, don't you think?" "This is a bad idea," I said. "I've seen that thing around town." Father Cherniak shook his head and put a hand on my shoulder. This was a man who was trained to talk to people, and I could tell. "If the Lord's house can't shelter you from the devil, then what can?" In exchange for a little manual labor, I was offered a hot shower and a proper meal. After sleeping in my car for a couple of days, I couldn't say no to that. Smooth talker or not, Father Cherniak seemed an honest man. He believed what he spoke of. As the hours passed, more and more people dropped by, mostly townsfolk coming by to cuss him out for being an idiot. Some of them threw rocks at the door demanding that he take them down. Others in turn thought that it was about time that somebody at the church had some balls. Just like Father Cherniak had said, if the house of the Lord can't shelter you from evil, then what can? By late afternoon, there was a significant gathering of people. Even those who had acted in anger earlier in the day were swayed. The argument was simple. Do they not trust in God? There was a bit of a cookout. Some brought sausages or steak for dinner. I spotted the 2 teenagers in the crowd stealing a bit of wine from one of the elderly. I lost track of time. It felt a bit like the Harvest Festival back in the day, something that drew the town out of hiding. The sounds and smells were the same, and I could see from the smiles in the crowd that I wasn't the only one feeling that way. Later in the day, Father Cherniak held a sermon. I don't remember much of it. I was having trouble staying awake. That, if anything, felt just like when I was a kid. It's amazing how something as stiff as church pews can be so lulling, but there was one part that stuck with me. The door is a threshold, he said, and the door of a church is the threshold between the vile and the sacred, between sin and saint. We can no longer live in uncertainty. We must live as we teach, and we are proud to say that we have been taught well. The sermon continued into the evening. It ended just after sunset. Some people wandered home, but others were ashamed to stay. It was no longer just a public gathering, it had turned into a challenge. The faith of the congregation pitted against the devil itself. Some went home to gather blankets and pillows, laying down to sleep on the floor. This wasn't easy for them. Some talked about the people who had disappeared over the years, people who had opened the door when Slepnik first came to knock. An elderly woman had gotten her neck broken. One man had been dragged out into the yard and hung from a tree. Another man had been mutilated. It pulled his arm right out of the socket, they whispered. We found it across the street. I tried talking to people, but it was clear that nobody wanted anything to do with me. I was still Jaramir's boy. The only ones who didn't seem to mind were the 2 teenagers that I had talked to earlier. Later that evening, they walked up to me, probably just to piss off their parents. Aren't you scared? One of them asked. Should I be? It's got a bloodied tooth for you, the other said. I don't think so, I smiled. I've only seen it once. Yeah, but... They quieted down, looking at one another and then back at me. I was missing something. Your dad, they said. Slepnik got him. Did no one tell you? They hadn't. Turns out it wasn't malfunctioning farm equipment that had killed him years ago. It was Slepnik. My dad had been the first victim on the list. Most of the villagers had considered this a sinner getting his just reward. Others figured that if you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. They had found him tangled in the swing set, his body broken and mangled. The kids left me alone with my thoughts for a while. They could tell that I wasn't all there. It was one thing to have him dead, but to die in such a horrifying way was unthinkable. I could barely picture him in my mind, and now there was a new image vying for my attention. Rattling chains, dripping blood. But there wasn't much time to think. As the clock passed midnight, someone came knocking. The church fell silent. Something pulled on the handles, 2 smacks, a pull on the handle again. These doors were massive and the hinges had just been reinforced, but I could still see them struggle. Father Cherniak took a deep breath. As the congregation fell silent, he spoke aloud. This is no place for sons of sin, he said. There is nothing for you to corrupt. It all stopped. We all breathed a sigh of relief, but the 2 teenagers didn't look too convinced. They had huddled up on the far side of the church. There was an emergency exit in one of the side rooms. The door moved again, this time with more determination. The handles were pulled even harder, and the smacking made the entire slab of wood crackle like a sinking ship. And then the wailing, the loud and desperate wailing. As soon as I heard it, I could see the color drain from the congregation's faces. The door was pulled back and forth, back and forth. A chandelier started to shake. "The door is coming down," somebody called out. "It's coming down now." Father Cherniak tried to calm them, but it was too late. People flooded the rear exit of the church trying to get away. I was pushed aside without much thought. If the Dabrowski kid bit the bullet, all the better as far as these people were concerned. "There is no sin in the house of the Lord," Father Cherniak yelled. "There is no sin. The devil can laugh and jeer as much as he likes, but there is no place for his evil." But thoughtful words can't stop a broken door. Slepnik wasn't deterred. The doors came down, and there was a pause in the air as they fell. The air swept through the room, blowing out most of the candles along the pews. As the doors hit the ground, the crowd panicked. Most of them were already on their way out. People screamed, others cursed. I was in the far back of the crowd, and it was clear that I was never going to make it out without being crushed. I settled instead for hiding among the front pews, hoping that the darkness would shield me. I could barely see Slepnik in the flickering candlelight. His right arm had grown out of his shoulder blade, and his left arm was so long that it scraped against the floor. He had a sort of hunchback pose, but there was something that kept moving on his back, fluttering like a shivering membrane. He wasn't wearing a coat, he just wasn't human. He looked like something vaguely trying to resemble a human. Even Father Cherniak ran, hiding behind the altar. Slepnik rushed through the room in a messy gallop, knocking over pews as he went. They didn't even slow him down. When he got to the side room, people had already run screaming out into the night. Slepnik couldn't catch them. Instead, he settled on throwing things across the room, tearing down whatever he could reach, and breaking whatever he could lay his hands on. His wailing had turned to rage, and he was out of control. I was laying flat on my stomach, crawling away. Father Cherniak wasn't so lucky. Just like Slepnik had done with the brick wall, he climbed up on the altar, and from there he could see the priest. I don't like to recall what I saw. It's unworthy to make a spectacle of tragedy. But Slepnik didn't care for titles or words. He didn't care about anything. He picked Father up with a single arm, holding him outstretched in front of him like a child considering an unfamiliar vegetable. Father Cherniak tried his best. In between desperate cries, he said the most powerful words that he knew. He compelled, he demanded, and when nothing seemed to work, he begged and prayed. And then Slepnik unhinged his jaw like a snake. The screaming stopped with a snap as a spray of blood shot out. Something thumped against the altar and rolled onto the wooden floor. A pair of glasses clattered against the ground. Slepnik spat and coughed, picking tufts of hair from his teeth. He let the body slip from his grip, drooping unceremoniously to the red carpet. I remember crawling. I crawled as quietly and carefully as I could. Speknik was big, but his footsteps were light, like he was tiptoeing everywhere that he went. I didn't notice that he was behind me until his shadow drowned me. I rolled around only to see his vast shape towering over me. He must have seen me. There was still a couple of candles. For a moment I saw his face, a half-made gray thing with black, inward-leaning concave eyes, a faint shimmer like scales from a fish, a human mouth with an extra mandible, a twitching nose adjusting to the smell of burnt wax and blood. Viscera still dripped from his strange lips. And then he grabbed me, carefully, slowly. I closed my eyes as I was pulled in closer. He looked at me. He looked close. I could feel the heat of his mouth. Perhaps I would be tastier. And then he made a noise. I can't put my finger on what kind of noise it was, but I had never heard it before. A squeal, perhaps. A confused rattle. He put me back down. I opened my eyes as those large black eyes turned away from me. He was leaving. His rage subsided. As he dragged his long arm across the floor, his wailing bubbled back up. But it wasn't as desperate. It was confused. The effects of the attack was immediate. Some went to get their hunting gear, others were blaming the priest, saying that he wasn't holy enough. Others were leaving town entirely. After all, if God couldn't save them, they had to save themselves. I made my way back to my father's home. There was so much that he had never told me, and it was too late to ask. I had no idea what kind of mess he had been wrapped up in, but I couldn't stand by and wait for it to blow over. If this was his fault, if all of this was his fault, I would gladly join the others to spit at his name. But I couldn't do it without knowing for sure. I had to be sure. I went room by room, pulling out drawers and kicking over boxes. I threw around moth-eaten clothes. I tipped the bed. I dragged down the wardrobe, crashing it onto the wooden floor, hoping that I could find something, anything to answer my questions. Finally, I ran out into the backyard. I saw the stains on the swing set. I remember him pushing me on it, making the chains creak as I went higher and higher. But now that noise meant something else, something dark. An image of a broken man wrapped in a forgotten toy. I don't know how long I went berserk on that house, but I remember finally just taking a swing at it. As I mentioned, a part of the kitchen had burned. You could punch right through it. So I did. Turns out, there is a secret panel beneath the kitchen sink. I didn't register it at first. I just thought that I had hit a second, harder wall. But as I calmed down and looked a little bit closer, I realized it was a small compartment under the sink. I had punched right through from the outside. I sat down flat on the wet grass, feeling it soaking into my jeans as I dug around. There was a box. Most of it was tainted by rats, part of it was burned, but there were little bits and bobs that I could make sense of. The family albums, mostly pictures of me and my sisters, friends from around the village. A picture of Dad next to his first car, pictures from our Facebook printed and framed, the kind of things that one would like to keep. But then the pictures stopped. No more dates, no more birthdays, nothing. But I kept turning the pages, and in the back there was something else. Other pictures, notes. Pictures of a door with a text written on the back. It's not screaming, it's crying. Little notes on the margin, saying that it was afraid, it was lost, that no one listened and that no one cared. There were no more pictures, but there were notes. He had to get out, wants to stay. He hunts elk in the forest and brings it to me. There's nothing left of him. I understand. It told a story of my father trying to help something that didn't belong, something from another place. They shared meals and kindness, trying their best to find common ground. This had seemingly gone on for months. It spoke of spring and later winter. I will let him sleep in the house, the final note said. Maybe it can help his night terrors. Something must have happened. A dangerous creature like that inside a small house. Maybe there was an accident, a misunderstanding. Maybe it strung him up by the chains to make him look alive, like a puppet. Either way, I was close to an answer. Maybe I was looking more like my father than I had realized. Looking back at it, I felt like a sleepwalker. I wasn't thinking clearly. Maybe it was the adrenaline. I walked around in a daze and making my way back into town. It was quieter now. Many had rushed to their cars. I followed the dirt road back to the brick wall and I found him. Slepnik, wailing weakly, tapping against the bricked-in doors, pulling a little on a handle, hoping against hope that something would happen. He wasn't angry when I approached. He was confused. I had to make him understand, to see the truth of things. So, despite everything that I had seen and everything that I heard, I decided to trust my instinct. My father had made many mistakes, but he was no fool. His mistakes were honest. So if this was a mistake, I prayed to God it would be an honest one. "Follow me," I said. "This way." Slepnik had featherlight steps. I could still hear commotion around town, but it was all swallowed by that soft wailing. Slepnik couldn't stop himself. We made our way to the cemetery, to the overturned headstone and the overgrown lot. I tapped the ground, looked at this creature, and said it as simple as I could. "Here," I said. "Father." Perhaps it understood me. Perhaps it didn't. But it could rip out handfuls of dirt like it was nothing, and it did. It took a long time, but not as long as it should have. My dad had not been buried deep or well. Just as nobody had cared for his funeral, nobody had cared about his resting place. It didn't take long for Slepnik to make his way down, and as his hands hit the casket, I looked down to a curious sight. You see, my father had died poor, so poor that they hadn't put much effort into his casket. It was more like a box and the lid looked familiar. And looking a little closer, I realized that it was a door, the actual front door of our house. They had just thrown it on and called it a day. Slepnik stroked the door with his long fingers, his wail slowing to a hum. He had finally found the right door, the one that he had been looking for. I'll never forget that image for as long as I live. An ungodly creature breaking open the casket lid, pushing away a bed of dry blue sunflowers, lifting a long-forgotten corpse from its resting place, cradling it like a mother calming a crying child, its wailing turning to a quiet sob. "Ta-ta," he cried. "Ta-ta." Slepnik wandered off into the night, past the men with guns and those hunkering down in their houses. He did not care. Maybe he had never cared. Maybe he had just been angry that he couldn't find the right door. But as the chaos settled, there would be no need to hide your doors any longer. Slepnik was gone. I sold my father's property, but I kept the photo albums. His name is still spoken like a curse, but at least there's nothing to keep that curse alive. There have been no more sightings of Slepnik as far as I know. The locals didn't want to point fingers at the devil when they called the authorities. Some tried, but it's easier to convince people of a killer rather than a monster. There were questions around the countryside, but as with most things, it was left in an open-ended folder in an office somewhere, unsolved and deprioritized. I returned to Warzawa. It might not be my home, but home is not just a place, it's a time, and that time is long past. It has taken some effort to accept that for now. I might not have a real home, but that doesn't mean that I'll never have one. Much like Slepnik, I think there is a struggle in finding someplace that you belong. But over the southern countryside, the forest lies still. There is no wailing, no knocking, no screaming. And I think that somewhere beyond the trees, anyone can find a place to call home. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. Everybody knows there are things they can do to reduce monthly costs and improve their finances, but who has time to go through all of their expenses and decide what to trim? With Rocket Money crunching the numbers for you, leveling up your money game gets way easier. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. Rocket Money shows you all of your expenses in one place, including subscriptions that you forgot about. If you see a subscription that you no longer want, Rocket Money will help you cancel it. And if you've got a goal that you would like to save for, Rocket Money can analyze your accounts to find the best time each month to put extra money aside. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps today. That's rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. You know, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where the local diner serves coffee in mugs stamped with your name, and everyone will lend a hand to a neighbor in need. A place where generations of families grew up together. Well, that is the sort of place where I live. Sure, it is a bit rustic. I mean, heck, I barely even have reliable internet. But it is nice enough for us. It's the kind of place where time feels like it's standing still. Except for one thing. The nights. The nights here are a little different. I have lived here all my life, and there's no place that I would rather be. Or at least, that's what I used to think. This place has its quirks, like any small town. But there's a big one that stands out for us. You see, every night, without fail, at 11:38 p.m., the town locks down. I'm not talking about just closing up shops and less people being out and about. I'm talking about a real lockdown. Doors slam shut and are barred. Windows rattle and lock. And everybody knows that they have to be inside and stay inside, at least for the next part. The next part is strange. No one ever sees anything moving out there directly, but we all just know. We just know that somehow something outside is trying to get inside. An eerie silence falls over the streets. It's like the whole town is holding its breath. And then in 12 minutes exactly, it's just over. I've always wondered why it happens at exactly 11:38 p.m. People here don't talk about it much, but when they do, they whisper. They say it's just the way that things are, that it's been happening for as long as anyone can remember. But I know better. I've seen it. Whatever it is. I remember the first time I experienced the lurking threat to our town. I was still pretty young, only 10 or 11 years old at the time. I had been exploring the forest near the outskirts of town with my friends. The sun had been high in the sky when we first set out on our adventure into the nearby woods. My friends Sarah and Pete, who I had known since childhood, were by my side as we navigated through the dense foliage. Our families had always been close, and that bond extended to us as well, making the three of us inseparable. The forest was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and pine. We laughed and joked as we explored every nook and cranny of this familiar yet mysterious place. The woods on the outskirts of town always felt a little bit spooky to us, and we often only traveled there when we were all together. I remember vividly the sense of fear but also adventure as we had wandered. The trees towered above like sentinels guarding us against our worst fears of what lay beyond. The sunlight filtered in through the dense canopy in spears of gold, casting long, ominous shadows on the forest floor. Sarah, Pete, and I had wandered deeper than we had ever had before, our curiosity piqued by the whispers of hidden streams and forgotten trails. We had never been this far before, and we were having so much fun that we lost track of time completely. As the sun started to lower, we finally noticed how long it had been. It was already after 6 p.m., All three of us knew the rules about being inside before dark, but especially before nighttime, and the even more perilous window of time later. As the sun dipped even further, the forest grew darker, and the air thickened with an unsettling energy. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches creaking ominously in the fading light. Sarah, ever the voice of reason, suggested that we head back, her tone steady but laced with a hint of urgency. "It's getting late," she said, looking suddenly concerned. "We should find our way back before it gets too dark." Pete and I exchanged a glance, but the thrill of adventure still pulsed through us. "Come on, just a bit further," I urged, though my voice wavered slightly. Sarah hesitated, her hazel eyes reflecting a growing unease. As we pressed on, the forest floor became a tapestry of shadows, each step crunching on leaves that seemed to whisper warnings. The sounds of the forest shifted, the bird song replaced by an eerie silence. And then a rustle in the bushes ahead stopped us in our tracks. "What was that?" Pete whispered, his breath catching. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her pocket, her eyes scanning the undergrowth. "Oh, probably just a rabbit," she said, though her voice lacked any conviction. But as we stood there, the rustling grew louder, more deliberate. It moved around us, circling and unseen. My heart pounded and Sarah gripped my hand. "We need to go," she said firmly, turning us toward the path home. As we hurried back, the woods seemed to close in around us, the trees casting long and sinister shadows. The rustling followed, always just out of sight. And then a low and guttural whisper seemed to echo through the trees, sending chills down my spine. Sarah quickened our pace, her usually reserved demeanor just giving way to a palpable fear. "Don't look back," she urged, her voice soft but urgent. "Just keep moving." We emerged from the woods and saw the streetlights glowing in the distance, the familiar sight of our town a relief. But the memory of those unseen eyes lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond our safe haven. As kids, we knew that it was not safe at night, but the real danger in when the specific time was still unknown. I wish that it had stayed that way. We made it to our homes as the streets were already silent and barren. We were safe, but we were late. We all got back to our respective homes just after 10 p.m. Our parents were worried and upset in equal measure. Despite the litany of promised punishments and concerns expressed by them, they were just glad that we had gotten back before it had gotten much later. My parents stood outside, their faces etched with worry and relief. "Where have you been?" my mother demanded, her voice sharp with fear. "We were worried sick." We got lost in the woods," I stammered out. My father's expression softened, but only slightly. "You know the rules. You need to be home before dark. Every night. This was far too close." I nodded my head and slumped my shoulders in defeat. He was right, but I still didn't know why. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only glimpsed the edge of something much larger, something that the town kept hidden. And I knew that I wasn't the only one who felt it. Sarah and Pete had saw it too. I was grounded, of course. I would not be playing with my friends anytime soon. I was a bit bummed out but also unnerved after my experience. I had stayed up later than normal reading some of my favorite comic books to get my mind off of it. But just then, I heard the strangest sound. It was a low and guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I looked out the window and that's when I saw it. The streets were empty, but there was a presence. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a person or an animal. It was something else. Something that didn't feel like it belonged there. It moved with this strange and jerky motion, like it wasn't entirely in control of its own body. It radiated a disturbing sense of distortion that made my head hurt and my eyes had a difficult time focusing on it. I could feel this overwhelming sense of hunger that made my skin crawl. Before I knew it though, it was over. It had passed by my house and I realized that I had been staring out my window in a hypnotic daze. It was almost midnight and I went to sleep, and I didn't tell my parents about the disturbing thing that I had seen. The next morning, the memory of what I had seen lingered like a shadow in my mind, refusing to be shaken. I lied to myself, saying that it was all just a dream or a trick of the light, but the uneasy feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I went through the motions of my day trying to focus on schoolwork and chores, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that thing. Whatever it was, it felt wrong, like a crack in the world that shouldn't exist. It wasn't until that evening, when the sun had started to dip below the horizon and cast the town in a pale twilight, that the phone rang. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anybody to call. My heart raced as I picked it up, hesitating for a moment before answering. "Hello?" I said, my voice a little bit shaky. "Hey." Sarah's voice came through the line, as calm as ever, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't miss. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Sarah, no, hi. What's up?" I tried to sound casual, but my mind was already racing. Why was she calling me? "Listen, I need to ask you something," she said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Did you see anything strange last night? After what we already saw in the forest. Around the time of night that everyone is afraid of." I paused, my grip tightening on the phone. How did she know? "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to play it cool, but my voice betrayed me. "You must have." Pete's voice cut in. He was on the line as well, and his tone was unusually serious. "We know what we saw, and we think that you might have seen it too." "Pete's here with me," Sarah explained. We all saw something, didn't we?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What are you talking about?" I tried again, but it was no use. They knew, somehow they knew. "Come on, don't make us spell it out," Pete said. "You must have seen it. You know it and we know it. So just be honest with us." I sighed, the weight of the secret passing down on me. "Fine," I admitted quietly. "I saw something. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't right. It moved weird and it felt off, like it didn't belong here." Sarah's breath hitched on the other end of the line. "That's exactly what we saw and felt. It's like it warped the air around it, didn't it? It made your head hurt just to look at it." "Yeah," I said, shivering at the memory. "Exactly. And this hunger, like it was starving for something." "Hunger," Pete repeated. "Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, it felt like it was starving. For what though? That's the question." "I've got no idea," I said. But whatever it is, I don't think that it's good. The line suddenly went silent. Not the kind of silence where somebody's waiting for you to speak, but the kind that made you wonder if the connection was still alive. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat louder than the last, as I strained to hear anything. Breathing, movement, anything. And then suddenly, the silence shattered. "Hey, kiddo." My mother's voice cut through the line, bright and cheerful, jarringly out of place. "Can you come downstairs for a second? Your dad and I need to talk to you about something." I blinked, my mind racing. How did she even know that I was on the phone? "Mom, I'm kind of in the middle of something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can it wait?" "No, sweetie, it can't wait," she said, her tone shifting from cheerful to firm. "We need to talk to you now. And remember, you're not supposed to be talking to your friends right now. You know the rules." I groaned inwardly. Of course, now of all times, they decide to enforce the no phones rule while I was grounded. "But this is important," I protested, though I knew it was useless. "You don't understand." "We mean it." My dad's voice cut in, his deep tones flat and serious. "Now come downstairs." I could feel the weight of their gaze even through the phone, as if they could see me sitting there, clutching the receiver like it was a lifeline. "Fine," I muttered, though I knew that they couldn't hear me. "I'll be right there." I hung up the phone with a shaky hand, my mind racing. What were they going to say? Did they know about the calls, about what we had seen, and how had they even known that I was on the phone? I had been so careful, keeping the volume low, only talking when I was sure that they were distracted. But no, they always seemed to know. It was like they had a sixth sense for it, a radar that pinged whenever I tried to step even an inch out of line. I sighed, pushing myself up from the edge of my bed. My legs felt heavy, uncoordinated, as if the conversation had sapped all the strength from them. I made my way downstairs, each step creaking under my feet like a ticking clock. When I reached the bottom, my parents were already in the living room, seated on the couch with their backs straight up, their expressions unreadable. "Sit down, please," my mother said, her voice soft but commanding. I did, perching on the edge of the armchair across from them, my hands clasped tightly together in my lap. "What is this about?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my voice trembled slightly. "We know that you've been talking to your friends again," my father said, his voice even but laced with an undercurrent of disappointment, "despite what we had agreed." "It's not a big deal," I said, trying to brush it off. "We were just—" "It is a big deal," my mother cut in, her tone sharp. "We've talked about this. You cannot go running off with them out that late into the woods. It is not safe. You do not know how worried we were." I swallowed hard, the familiar knot of frustration tightening in my chest. "You don't understand," I said, the words spilling out before I could even stop them. "This is important. Something's wrong and we're trying to figure out what it is." My parents exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, I thought that I saw a flicker of something, concern maybe, or doubt, but it was gone before I could be sure. "We've talked about this. There's nothing wrong. There will be nothing wrong as long as you just stay inside and do not go out at night. We need to be vigilant and keep everyone safe." I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. You think that I meant to get lost. It was a mistake. And how come you won't tell us why everybody in town just hunkers down and nobody is allowed out at night?" My dad just replied, "It's for your own good. You'll understand when you get older. We have to keep you safe. We have to keep everyone safe." I went back upstairs and set the phone that I was still holding down. I walked to the window, staring out into the dark. The streets were quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting, and next time it wouldn't just pass by. The night after that call, I found myself standing at my window again, staring out into the same darkness, half expecting to see it. But there was nothing, just the faint hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I told myself that it was only my imagination running wild, that we had all been spooked by something that could be explained away with science or logic. But the feeling lingered, a shadow in the corner of my mind that I couldn't shake. We didn't see it again, not directly, but the air in town felt heavier after that summer, as if something had shifted just beyond the edge of perception. People went about their lives, but there was a quiet unease, a shared glance exchanged when the streetlights flickered or the wind died down too suddenly. That was when our friend from school, Michael, went missing. It wasn't the first time that a kid had disappeared in our small town, but it was the first time that it felt different. Michael was the kind of boy who could vanish for days and turn up with a grin and a story about some wild adventure. But this time there was no story, only silence. His parents found his bike abandoned on the edge of the woods, the chain broken, the handlebars twisted at an odd angle. The police searched, but it was half-hearted. Anybody who was out for an entire night was never expected to come back. After that, the group of us, Sarah, Pete, and I, started to drift apart. We would meet up sometimes, sitting in the same spot by the river, where we used to talk about school and life and everything in between. But the conversation would inevitably circle back to Michael, to what we had seen that summer, to the unspoken fear that it had taken him. The laughter grew quieter, the silences longer. Eventually, we stopped meeting altogether, each of us retreating into our own lives, our own struggles. At some point, Sarah and Pete reunited and eventually got married. They still lived in town. It seemed like nobody ever left this place. Their home was just a few blocks away from mine, but I rarely spoke to them. It wasn't because I didn't want to, it was more than that. I felt like they had moved on without me, and I couldn't shake the feeling of jealousy since I had always harbored a secret crush on Sarah. I heard they moved into a house close by to take care of Sarah's mother, who was suffering from Alzheimer's and needed constant care. Sometimes while out walking, I would see them with her on the sidewalk, but I was too embarrassed to say hello. For my part, even though I felt guilty for trying to forget our friendship, I couldn't forget what we saw. I couldn't stop looking. Every night I would stand at my window, scanning the street, the yard, the stretch of woods beyond the houses. I told myself it was just a habit, just paranoia, but deep down I knew better. I was waiting for it to come back, to see if it would show itself again, and when it didn't, I couldn't decide if I was relieved or disappointed. Years went by and the memory of that summer faded into the kind of half-remembered terror that feels more like a dream than reality. But on quiet nights when the house was still and the world felt too large, I would catch myself standing at the window again, searching the darkness for something that didn't belong. and sometimes in the flicker of a shadow or the bend of a tree limb, I could swear that I saw it, just for a moment, just out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing ever there. Or so I told myself. The truth was, I had seen it again, more than once, always in the periphery, always gone when I turned to look. It was a trick of the light, I had said, a trick of the mind. But the hunger, the same gnawing hunger, lingered in the air, sharp and relentless, and I couldn't help but wonder, had it ever really left? Or had it just been waiting, biding its time, until the moment was right? We all know it exists, but we pretend like it doesn't. We try to act as if we have a strict curfew and that there's nothing lurking outside. But those who are too brave or naive, thinking that it's all just a big joke, they don't last very long. They always end up being taken away, just like those who fall victim by accident. I couldn't help but wonder which one Michael was. Those of us who are still here know that whatever that thing is, it's out there, stalking and hunting, looking for anything, an open window, a cracked door. Disappearances are still frequent, especially for such a small town. The police have a whole song and dance for anybody who goes missing from the outside. But when it is a resident, well, it's more of a case where the families of the victims are reprimanded for not having known better. No one knows why the window of time is so mercifully brief. Almost just as suddenly as it starts, it's over. By 11:50 p.m., the streets are quiet again and the town feels normal. But it's not normal, it never was. People here have learned to live with it. They lock their doors and shut their windows and pretend that it's not happening. When I was a bit older and I knew more, I asked my parents why we didn't just move, but they never gave me a good answer. All they said was, it wouldn't do any good. It has to be here. It is safer for everyone if it's here. It didn't make sense. I know that people can get attached to places, but it felt crazy to me. I couldn't just pretend that this was all normal. Not after what I saw. Not after what I felt. There was something out there, and it's worse than anyone would believe. And then after years of waiting, I finally saw it again. It was a normal night, at least as normal as nights could be in my town. I was getting ready to go to bed when I noticed that my cat Quincy was outside. He had gotten out when I had come home earlier and was sauntering along the sidewalk outside. The time was 11:36 p.m. I had no idea if this creature did anything to animals, but I did not want to find out. I had never let Quincy outside before, and when he did not come back to my shouted calls for his return, I had to do something dangerous and stupid to save him. And so I rushed outside to save him. I raced out to grab my cat, and I froze when I sensed a presence as I was scrambling back to my door. Quincy's ears folded back and he hissed. I felt paralyzed, and then I thought that I saw it again. It was different this time, larger and more overwhelming than before. Its presence seemed to fill the entire street, pressing against the houses like an unseen force. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't work. I was frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. To my horror, it seemed to finally regard me. Quincy jumped out of my hands and ran back to my house. He had fortunately evaded whatever interest the thing might have had with him. The creature's head twisted unnaturally in my direction, its distorted features coalescing into more recognizable shapes. Staring into the grotesque visage forced to scream out of me as I beheld the blasphemous impossibility. I turned and sprinted away, screaming like a maniac, my heart hammering against my ribcage with such force that each beat felt like it might crack my chest open. The sound of its pursuit echoed behind me. A wet slapping noise like a monstrous jellyfish gliding across the ground. Its deafening roar filled the air, shaking the ground beneath my feet as I ran for my life. I did not know if I could get away. No one that I knew had been outside and survived. I ducked into an alley, my hands shaking as I pressed myself against the wall. My breath came in short and sharp inhales, and I could feel sweat dripping down my face. I didn't dare look around the corner. I didn't dare move. And then I heard a familiar voice crying out, "Mom, please, come back inside. We need to go now." The harrowing screams that came next sliced through the air, piercing and full of terror. My heart raced as I strained to see who was making them, but all I could make out were shadowy figures caught in the open. The screams were short, sharp, and then they were swallowed by the night. The deafening silence that followed only added to the fear weighing down on me. I stayed pressed against the wall, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The darkness seemed to come alive with every creak and rustle, amplifying my fear. I held my breath until I heard the sound of the creature moving away, and then just like that, it was gone. But the eerie stillness lingered, haunting me even after the clock struck 11:50 p.m. The streets were once again quiet, but my nerves were still on edge. I stumbled back to my house, every step feeling like a race against time. Quincy waited anxiously at the door and bolted inside with me, seeking shelter inside. The horrible night had left me shaken but grateful to be alive. Whatever that thing is, it does not belong in this world. It is not of this time or place, and its presence is so unsettling, it makes your mind ache just to catch a glimpse of it. No one can tell of its origins. Maybe they are lost in the depths of history. But whatever its history, it remains. Always there, lurking in the shadows every night without fail. The encounter had left me shaken, but I wasn't ready for the truth that would be revealed. The screams that I heard that night and my miraculous survival suddenly made sense when I discovered who the real victims were. The realization hit me like a hammer to the chest. Peter and Sarah Morris, along with Eleanor Smith, were missing. The names echoed in my mind, refusing to settle. Pete and Sarah had been out there that night. The chilling cry from a woman's voice, Sarah calling out to her mother, who had wandered out of their home at the fateful moment. I couldn't breathe. The air seemed thick and pressing against my lungs as if the darkness itself had taken on a physical form. Quincy, sensing my distress, stayed close, his eyes watchful and uneasy, but even his presence couldn't comfort me. The truth was clawing its way to the surface, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I stepped outside. The air was colder now, biting at my skin. The streets were already empty again, but the shadows seemed to move on their own accord, twisting into shapes that made my blood run cold. I walked without a destination, my feet carrying me on autopilot while my mind raced. How could this be happening? How could they be gone now? They were supposed to be okay. We were supposed to be okay. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Whatever that thing was, it had taken them, and it had left me alive. Why? The questions swirled in my head like a storm, each one sharper and more terrifying than the last. I found myself at the edge of the town square, staring at the old oak tree where we had held so many gatherings. Its branches creaked in the wind, a mournful sound that seemed to whisper their names. Pete, Sarah, how could this have happened to you? I walked numbly back home, almost heedless of the encroaching hour. I stepped back inside and Quincy meowed softly, nudging my hand with his muzzle. I couldn't process everything that had happened. The creature wasn't just some mindless beast, it was calculated. I realized that I might be the only one who had seen it and lived to tell the tale. At that point, I did the one thing you probably think that everybody should have done by now. I left my hometown. I moved to the largest city that I could reach to get away from it all. My parents didn't approve. In fact, they tried to tell me that I couldn't go. I was so desperate to get out of there that I had to sneak away in the early morning when they couldn't interfere. I never understood why we all stayed there and tried to ignore the eldritch nightmare that hunted us at night. It seemed so simple and I felt better at first. The city felt alive with the hum of traffic and the distant chatter of people during the day. A cacophony that made me feel safe, anonymous. Indeed, I thought that I had left the nightmare behind, that the creature was just a memory, a relic of a past that I could bury. My new apartment is a cozy studio on the 5th floor with a view of the bustling streets below. High enough where looking out the window does not fill me with dread at night. But unfortunately, something happened last night that has shattered the fragile illusion of my peaceful transition. On the first night in my new place, I sat on the edge of my bed, flipping through a magazine to distract myself from the creeping unease that had settled into the pit of my stomach. The clock on the nightstand read 11:28 p.m. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that the creature was gone, that I was safe now. But the weight of the past lingered, a shadow in the corner of my mind that I couldn't shake. By 11:38 p.m., the city outside my window was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of traffic and distant music had faded, replaced by an unsettling stillness. I tried to focus on the magazine, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, the darkness beyond the glass pressing in on me. And then I heard it, a soft, tentative tap against the pane. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, the magazine slipping from my fingers and falling to the floor. The sound was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill coursing through my veins. I told myself it was just a stray branch, a bird, anything but what I feared. But then it came again, another tap, this time more insistent. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. My eyes were fixed on the window, the darkness beyond it seeming to pulse with a life of its own. The tapping stopped, and for a moment there was nothing but silence, and then a faint scratching sound like claws on glass. My heart sank. I knew that sound, and I knew what it meant. Slowly, with my legs trembling beneath me, I rose from the bed and approached the window. My hand reached for the curtain, hesitated, and then, with a deep and shaky breath, I pulled it back. What I saw made me freeze in terror. The creature was perched on the fire escape outside my window, its twisted form silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its presence seemed to fill the room, pressing in on me with an unspeakable horror. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The creature's head tilted to the side, its gaze locked on mine, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. It was here. It had followed me. And then, as if in slow motion, its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out a low and guttural growl. The sound shattered the paralysis that held me in place. I stumbled back, my voice finally breaking free in a raw and terrified scream. The creature's form seemed to blur and shift, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable darkness. And then everything went black. I regained consciousness, and I know that it's not over. There's no escape from this thing that has followed me. I consider what my parents had said when I asked them why we never moved. And then, with dawning horror, I realized the truth of their words. It is safer for everyone if it's here. And they didn't mean that it was safer for us. They meant it was safer for everyone else. They knew the danger and they stayed to keep it there. And now in my ignorance, I have made a huge mistake. Somehow it knew that I left. It has followed me here to a place where over 1 million people will soon know about its existence, and maybe more if it moves beyond that. My hands tremble as I write this, the weight of my mistake crushing me. The city outside my window is still quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and wrong. The clock on the nightstand reads 12:02 a.m. Less than an hour has passed since I saw it, since it found me. I can feel its presence, a cold, oppressive shadow lingering just beyond the edge of perception. In my irrational terror, I tried to barricade myself inside, shoving furniture against the door, but it feels useless. It got in before and it can get in again. My mind races trying to think of what to do next, but every thought is clouded by fear. I keep telling myself to stay calm, to think clearly, but the terror clawing at my chest makes it impossible. Even though I know it won't come for me until tomorrow, I can't shake the feeling that it's already here, lurking and watching my every move. Memories of past encounters with this entity flood my mind, causing an overwhelming sense of fear and unease. I try to rationalize and convince myself that I'm safe for now, but deep down I know it's only a matter of time before it comes for me once again. The apartment feels smaller now, the walls closing in on me. I've turned on every light hoping to chase away the darkness, but the shadows cast by the lamps seem to twist and writhe on the walls. I've tried calling for help, but my phone has no signal, as if something has severed the connection to the outside world. I pace back and forth, my eyes darting toward the window, half expecting to see it perched there again. The fire escape creaks faintly and I freeze, my breath catching in my throat. It's just the wind, I tell myself, but the words ring hollow. I stop in front of the mirror above the dresser and stare at my reflection. My face is pale, my eyes wide and haunted. I look like a stranger, someone that I don't recognize. The person staring back at me is fractured, broken by the realization of what I've unleashed. I'm so sorry, this is my fault. I brought it here, I didn't know. Sarah, Pete, forgive me. Please, for your own safety, stay inside between 11:38 p.m. and 11:50 p.m. By now, it might not be safe wherever you are as well. I live in a small town, about 1,500 people, in the embodiment of a central Ohio farm community. Downtown Donuts is a mom-and-pop treat. They make the best French crullers, even though they're Korean-American. Winterson's Feed and Seed is a hub of gossip and commerce, as Old Maid Winterson also owns the train station and definitely plays favorites. And the Buckeye Bar is the pillar of the community, cleaner than any bar that I had been to when I got my ag degree at the University of Tennessee. Town Hall is the actual home of large town hall meetings where we discuss everything and anything that needs fixing. Potholes, Town Hall. Wild dogs hunting livestock, Town Hall. Hate the mayor's new buzz cut, Town Hall. This place is practically a stereotype, and that doesn't seem to bother anybody who lives here, except for a few edgy high schoolers. I've never loved this town, and if I'm honest, I hoped that I would be leaving it behind me with my bachelor's degree. But 6 years of tuition killed my bank account, and that meant moving back in with my step-parents. Yeah, I ought to have mentioned that. Lots of kids in my town have a step-parent, although only a few have two. My mom left the picture pretty soon after I was born, and my dad remarried. I only have one memory of my mom, and it's pretty vague. She had an eye patch, and she was adding a bunch of glitter and rhinestones to it. I don't know exactly how old I was, but I remember wanting it so bad it hurt. That's all that I remember of her, but I know that she didn't stick around for long. I don't remember why my mother left. Maybe she was tired of this town. Living here kills the soul. She wasn't from here anyway. Navia called her that city lady, and I always figured between the stress, having me, and the rules of the town, she just laughed. The first time my dad broke one of the town rules, he vamoosed and left me with my stepmom Navia. That hurt more than mom leaving did, probably because I got to know him. He was a kind and loving father, my personal superhero for 11 years and 3 months. I didn't take second to anything on this earth in his eyes. Navia remarried a man named Duke and gave me a semi-functional family again. That happened a decade and a half ago. So Duke and Navia are the only parents I've known for the last 15 years. They're good people even if they are flawed. But everybody's flawed. Navia works too much. She's always down at the Buckeye Bar sprucing things up or crunching numbers, making sure that the place runs smoothly. Duke is a good man when he's present, mentally that is, but he spends a lot of time with his head just out in space. His eye patch is pretty cool, or it was until I got a culture shock at college. Now the Dixie flag eye patch is just cringeworthy. Ohio wasn't even a southern state, but still, he's not a bad person, just misguided. What was I on? Oh, Dad, he was another story. Just him leaving. I remember the last day he went to buy donuts. He was supposed to be gone and back, but it was 8 o'clock and he had been hungover. Let me clarify something here in a feeble defense of my father. He was not a drunk, nor was he prone to substance abuse. Quite to the contrary, he and Navia had been celebrating his promotion to shift manager at Winderson's Feed and Seed. I don't know about anybody who's not from the middle of a farm community, but the Feed and Seed is a big deal in town. It pays well enough, but managers get more, and there's a lot of prestige that comes from holding that position, and old maid Winderson has always made it known that she hires up from inside. Dad had a lot to celebrate, and he and Navia did with gusto. Dad rolled out of bed late that day, which didn't matter because it was a Saturday and he was off. He had a hankering for donuts, which he loudly announced several times within earshot of Navia, who responded with a groaning. I smiled at Dad. I was 11 and he was my hero not just because he stuck around when Mom had bolted, but because he was a great dad. I knew a lot of stuff because of him. He leaned way down, wincing as he did. What do you think, boy? Do donuts sound good? I nodded, a big grin spreading across my face. Do you think Navia is going to get up and go get us any? I giggled and shook my head. Our conversation made all the more fun because he was whispering. What could we possibly do about that? He grinned from ear to ear, even though I could see his eyes were still bloodshot from their celebrating. Maybe I could get the donuts, I whispered, putting my hand beside my mouth to hide my talking. You could give me $50 and I'll bring back the whole stock. Dad rubbed his chin. That's a lot of donuts. Who would eat them all? I pointed at myself, suppressing a giggle. My dad's eyes went wide. They were the prettiest green. You? He whisper-shouted. That's a lot of donuts for a little kid. Nuh-uh, I countered with all my wit. Puffing out my belly and chest, I straightened to my full sitting height. I'm a big kid, I'm almost ready for 6th grade. Navia's groan echoed out of the bedroom again. She sounded like a zombie movie. Dad poked my belly with a finger and my held air gushed out. Shh, you'll wake the dead. Looking back, I realized that Navia didn't drink much, but I didn't know that yet. You don't want her to come and get ya. He grabbed at my sides and tickled me until I squealed. Are you getting donuts or what? The kid has got to be hungry by now, Navia moaned, her feet shuffling onto the cheap carpet of our apartment. My squeal must have rattled through my dad's hangover because his eyes got pained and he winced. His oof was soft though and he still smiled at me, his overbite noticeable at this angle. He pulled on his boots and seed and feed hat and shuffled out the door. That was the last time that I saw him act like Dad. Mrs. Jong said he had showed up at 8:07 and been browsing the donuts when 8:10 hit. She and her husband heard a shout of surprise seconds after the 8:10 bell rang. They kept their eyes closed the whole time that he was screaming and crying and cursing, all the way until 8:25 had passed, and then they called the doc. Crap, I forgot to mention the doctor. He has a name, but we'll just call him the doc. The doc is a good man by every measure. He doesn't charge people who break the rules even though he could make a mint if he did. He takes everybody's insurance or whatever anybody could pay to get fixed up if they didn't. I have it on good account that he accepted 2 eggs and a pretty flower for an eye surgery. I'm told he delivered me, which makes sense, because he's older than sin but sweeter than sugar. Anyway, Dad in his hungover stupor had broken the first rule. They're posted all over town as if we could forget. Close your eyes from 8:10 to 8:25, both in the AM and PM. He had been too hungover to react to the 8:10 bells and it cost him his left eye. Mrs. Zhang had a cut-off cup bottom on hand. Most of us do anymore, and had gauze and wrapped it over his left socket until the doc got there. The eye had been fully uncleated, severed it clean out, optic nerve, artery, and every small muscle neatly severed. This wasn't that rare. It seems that every year 1 or 2 people break a rule either on accident or because they're unusually drunk or just because they're new or stupid, or both. It was just one of those things you thought would never happen to you or somebody that you cared about, like car crashes or STDs. The doc re-wove the gauze and he and Mr. Zhang loaded Dad into the back of the doc's ambulance. The way that Miss Zhang told it, Dad was crying the whole way, trying to say stuff that wasn't quite words except cold, which he would repeat at irregular intervals. Our hospital, or what we called a hospital, is 2 floors and a little bigger than a nice house. Most of it is original with 4 beds and some pretty average medical stuff I quite frankly don't know much about. But our little 1-room surgery ward is top-notch for eye removal and replacement. The town had saved up on extra gas tax for 3 years to pay for it, and everybody was excited. As I recall, we bought it when I was about 7, and it was the talk of the town. Lots of people with one eye looked forward to well-installed prosthetics. After Dad got better, which took 2 hours or so because the doc is just that good, he came home and we didn't talk for 3 days. On the first day, he didn't do anything at all, just sat on the couch staring through the wall all the way out to nothing. He didn't move even when I hugged him, even when I crawled in his lap. Not even when Navia brought him food and something to drink. Not even as I peeked out my cracked bedroom door, when Navia put on some lace and wiggled in his lap. It was like the body was there, but the rest of him was just gone. I think at some point he fell asleep with his eyes open because the next morning he was still sitting there. The second day was better and worse. He acknowledged the world around him existed, he just didn't care. When I talked to him, he looked at me like a weird bug or maybe like a new toy that doesn't make sense. Navia would talk to him too, but he just stared through her and she stopped. He ate, which was a relief because it had been just over 24 hours, and drank a little water instead of his normal morning coffee. 3 times he went to the bathroom for a few minutes and then came back out. He kept going back to the sofa and staring out at the nothing. I eventually started playing at his feet, rolling my tank over his boots, he hadn't taken them off, like they were hills, and hiding my army men behind the heel. At bedtime, for some reason I couldn't understand, I peeked through my door again tonight. Navia didn't try what she did last night. I remember a vague sense of disappointment. I still feel uncomfortable about that evening. The third day was the hardest, on me and everybody else, and Dad was up to talking, but this whole demeanor had changed. He wasn't kind or angry or sad, he just stopped having any emotions at all. I would tell him that I loved him and he would say it back, but there wasn't any spirit in it. Navia was getting stressed, her hair was badly unkempt and its unruly curls stuck out at random. She cooed and coddled him, always hugging. He would return the hugs, but with limp arms and no squeeze. I cried to Navia that night while Dad was out on the sofa staring into the distance. She held me and promised that it would get better, that this happened when people broke rules, but Dad would recover. The day after he had started packing, he had regained his animation and spirit, but he was bitter and angry. God, my warning. He grumbled, pulling drawers out of their dresser and dumping clothes in. "Not going down there, not me, not going down there at all." His movements were angry and violent. Everything had to be slammed, nothing could just be dropped or put down. "Rules," he shouted occasionally. Navia tried again and again to reason with him, begging and pleading, but Dad wouldn't have it. He shouted back while still packing. I ran over, desperate to keep him, and I grabbed his free arm. "Please, Dad, please stay." He threw me off in a way that he never had before. I stumbled over a dresser drawer and fell, a splinter digging into my inner elbow as I landed awkwardly. "Ow, Dad." Dad whirled on me and Navia intercepted him. "I'm not staying in this death trap any longer. Come on, boy, we're leaving." Navia interrupted my small voice. "We can't go and you know it. We won't have any income and I can't leave my mother. Why are you acting like this?" Dad ripped the eye patch off his head, an obvious glass eye loud. "You know well why, Nev. We're all going to end up in the basement and you know it. Get your stuff in the car." His eyes blazed with spite and hate and 100 other evil emotions. I can't honestly believe even now that I've ever felt such a conflagration of ill will. I was scared of him. In that moment, all the kindness and fatherly love didn't mean boo. I couldn't go. He stared at me and I didn't move. I scooted slightly away from him and he took the hint. "You better get the heck out of here before you lose it too, boy. You only get one warning." He jabbed a finger in the air, meaning it for me, I was sure. I didn't know this man, he couldn't be my father. He slammed the bag shut, marched out to the car and drove out of my life. Navia and I watched the car go, thinking that he was going to turn around. In the first couple days that we were sure he'd be back soon after calming down. Losing your eye is no walk in the park and we knew that he must have taken it hard. We waited for weeks, but he never came. One day, 3 months later, Navia sat me down at dinner. "Well, kid, we have a problem," she said earnestly, looking me in the eyes. "What is it?" I asked. I think I already had an inkling of its nature. "Well, baby, you're not mine, not my blood, and I don't think you're..." Her voice failed her then, but I knew what she was going to say. "You don't think he's coming back, do you?" Navia's eyes were watery. It hurt to say it out loud. "No, baby, I don't think he is." She took a deep breath. "And once people realize that somebody's going to have to take care of you, it's not like he's dead." She stopped herself. "He's passed away. They need to find a place for you." "But I have a place. Isn't this my place?" I pointed at my room and all around in a big circle. "This is my place, it's where my stuff is." Navia smiled sadly in that grown-up way that infuriates kids. "Yes, baby, your stuff is here, but not your family. Someone is going to come and see where you want to be. You have a mother out there somewhere and you've got me here, but I'm not your blood. I don't want my mom, she left. I want you and I want my dad." I heard somebody crying and realized that it was me. "I want everything to be normal." Navia shushed me gently. "I want that too, baby, I do, but I think he's gone for good. Or if he is coming back, it won't be anytime soon." She put her hand on mine. "But if you want to stay here with me, I would like that." I sniffled. I know that because I was embarrassed in my tears. "I want to stay," I whispered. "Maybe he'll come back anyway." "Yeah, baby, maybe he'll come back." I knew she didn't believe it. Her voice was thick with something, guilt or maybe sorrow. At 11, I didn't bother thinking about how much my stepmom was hurt. I was the center of the world and the town rules had yanked out one of my exes. So that's when and why my dad left. Navia couldn't leave. Her mother was getting senile and she had to take care of her. And besides, she owned the profitable bar and losing that money scared her. The rules are pretty straightforward anyway, so if you just remember and don't get too drunk, you're pretty well safe. most of the time. Based on my time here, lots of people think that they're mentally disciplined, but no one has anything on this town. Do you know how hard it is to close your eyes for 15 minutes and not fall asleep? To just sit there waiting to hear a bell for what seems like forever. It's torture, but failing is what broke my father. So I do it twice a day from 8:10 to 8:25, morning and evening. Because that's the first rule. Close your eyes from 8:10 to 8:25 a.m. and p.m. every day. The rules don't make a lot of sense if you're an outsider, but we don't get them a whole lot. We're not connected to a highway and none of the interstate roads pass through here. If you want to come to our town, you've got to do a lot of driving out of the way. I don't know because I never cared enough to ask, but I'm guessing that's on purpose. Our high school teacher, Miss Jaku, in our local history class mentioned that the rules used to end at the edge of town back in 1933. In 1961, Mayor Lincoln Haversham got the bright idea to move the whole town 6 miles east. It was only 300 or so people back then, she said, and the idea wasn't as impossible as it would be now. After 2 years and a few months of hard work, the whole town was now outside at the old city limits. As soon as the sign was planted, people awaited 8:10 a.m. with their eyes wide open. Every single person with their eyes open suffered the same fate as my dad. Not that they all left, but they lost their eye, sliced clean out. Most of the people in town over 59 are missing one eye. Most of the people over 65 are just missing. The area where this town used to be is part of what we call the rule zone. Any new construction has to be in the original town area before it can expand elsewhere. To contain it, I guess. Now you might wonder about babies. I have. After all, they don't know how to do stuff, let alone follow rules. I asked my dad about it once when our neighbor had a baby. He just grunted and shrugged. I guess babies don't count. We teach kids the rules early so no one knows exactly when the rules start to count. The rules get drilled into you before you learn to read, and you're closing your eyes for the first rule before you're 2. I suppose we could do an experiment, but nobody has the stomach for it. But I know for a fact they count by 2nd grade. That was the day when Janaza Bartel and Freddie Zhang broke Rule 2. They were a part of my class in a rundown school. Town saved that money for the operating room, and it meant other things didn't get paid for. Under the tutelage of Mr. Morales. This is one of those schools where each room is a whole grade and you've got between 10 and 30 kids in each grade. Technically, we have 2 schools. Winterson Elementary and Daycare, and then the normal one. Winterson's is a sort of office daycare disguised as a school for zoning and taxes. No one ever accused old maid Winterson of being dumb. Most of us go to the town school grades 1 to 12 though. I was surprised at college to find out that even most other small towns aren't like that. I always assumed it was just part of a small town life. Mine was a class of 12 kids, the smallest on record I think so. I got to know each of them really well and we all stayed in contact, for the most part. No one hears from Freddie Zhang or Little Nance though. We have suspicions that Freddie broke the rules a 2nd time because we knew that he had broke them the 1 time already. We were there. And frankly, I don't know about Nancy. Maybe she broke the rules, but I hadn't kept up with her. She got into meth pretty hard after graduation and may have just OD'd out in the fields. A town like this can drive you to anything to escape. And meth is a problem everywhere anyways. Freddie Zhang and Janasia Bartel had made a bet one day about breaking the 2nd rule. Or so I was told by Sam Upson a week later. The 3 of them had been tight though, so I don't see a reason to doubt it. It had been a series of escalating dares, the sort of dumb stuff that kids do before they're grown enough to want to touch each other under the clothes. Touch a slug, put a blueberry up your nose, fart in the middle of class, that type of stuff. Sam said that it had been going on for nearly a week when Janasia came up with the rule breaking. From 12:30 to 1, a second sun appears in the sky of our town and makes everything colder. In winter, it goes from freeze your nuts off to freeze your piss while pissing in the summer, and it goes from hot to not so bad. Unlike the other things, the second sun is something the town is pretty proud of, and I think it's the reason that the whole place hasn't been abandoned. It makes plants grow something magnificent. Crops grow a quarter-inch every afternoon and flowers bloom even if they shouldn't. A lot of people think the price of not looking up while it's out is worth it. Well, probably not Freddie and Janasia though. They got it bad. Janasia called Freddie all kinds of chicken and declared that she had won and stuff like little kids. Because they were little kids and because they were little kids, it worked Freddie up into breaking rule number 2 with her. I don't remember the stuff leading up, but they weren't really my close friends. Their biggest problem was going to be Mr. Morales, they thought. At 5'11" and 200 pounds of boxing muscle, he was a tough guy, aside from the memory issues and neck pain. I'm probably in the prime of my life while he's about 56, and I still wouldn't dream of taking him on. He's really great with kids though, so they made a plan and enlisted Sam to help. I think he feels guilty to this day. Sam was supposed to jump up and run to the back of class, shouting about ants in his pants. Because I kid you not, that's the best plan a trio of second graders could possibly come up with. Yeah, ants in their pants. And then when Mr. Morales was busy helping Sam with his ant problem, they assumed it would be easy to get to the window and look up. I hate to admit that it worked, but that was the same time in the 90s that fire ants were the next great threat to America. So 12:40 rolled around and Sam jumps up screaming, "Ants! Ants in my pants!" and sprints to the back of the classroom. He had a flair for the dramatic, as I recall, shouting, "Ants are biting my wee-wee." Still probably the funniest thing that I've heard in my life. Janasia and Freddie made it so that I don't laugh about it anymore though. Mr. Morales fell for it hook, line, and sinker. "Drop and roll," he shouted, sprinting to the back. Facing no one and scrambling to slap Sam's legs hard enough to kill ants, but to not hurt the child entrusted to his care by the county. Everybody was dying, either laughing or screaming about the ants. Kids have impressionable minds. One person starts screaming about ants and half the class imagines hard enough that they feel them too. Those of us that were laughing stopped pretty quickly and joined the screamers. While Sam and the teacher were panicking, Janasia and Freddie sprinted to the window. It wasn't far. Freddie was right by the window and Janasia sat right behind him. They checked the clock, one of the old cheap plastic ones that was never on time. We ignored it and used the 8:10 bells for the first rule. Sure enough, it said 12:42. Both of them pushed their faces up against the glass eye casted upwards, and that's when the smell hit. That awful mix of acrid and meaty that is burnt human flesh and air. It struck the whole class and dragged their attention away from Sam's antics to the window. Somehow it filled the class before the screaming. Smoke wafted up from Janasia's face as she yelped and began to scream. Freddie, I think, went straight into shock and just kind of fell in on himself. He went face down on the floor and I'm glad for it. But Janasia Bartell didn't. She spun around and flailed wildly, looking for something, the teacher to fix it or the safe invulnerability of childhood. Crap, I mean, she probably wanted her mommy. Whichever it was, she didn't find it. I could see the bubbling flesh and melting eyeball goop running down her left cheek. Blackened, brittle flesh, cracked in hair-thin zigzags all through her socket. Cloudy fluid weeping from each crack. Small blisters formed around the edge of her socket and swelled. Her eyes locked on Sam, where Mr. Morales was staring with his jaw slack like a fish in shock. The word cold escaped her lips, which shook Mr. Morales from his stricken state and into action. He wrestled her to the ground with more effort than he should have needed before shouting at us to get the doctor. One of us, I didn't look at who, went sprinting out of the room while the other kids took turns, dry heaving or crying or sometimes both. Once Janasia was subdued, he bound her eye in a roll of gauze that I got him, on command from the teacher's desk. Every couple of years, he shouted. Some dumb kid. Janasia passed out shortly after, and Mr. Morales attended to Freddy. It would be nice if it ended there, I mean it really would. But the second that Mr. Morales had touched Freddy, he jumped straight up and did a weird shiver, tremble, seizure thing. He touched the empty socket which, just like Janasia's, was blackened, burnt, and had started to crack. The flesh came away completely, stuck to his fingertips, and it started oozing what looked like overbaked blood. He whispered something about ice and started grabbing at his other eye, trying to pry his little fingers behind it. Mr. Morales snatched the arm away and Freddy screamed, flinging the burnt flesh goop everywhere. Mr. Morales, I'll give him credit, did not fall down and puke his guts out like I did. Some of it hit me in the cheek and it felt like a messed up, melted ice cream. Cold and sticky, and it left my skin with a tightness that I hated. The feeling spread as it ran down my face, curving over the corner of my mouth, which immediately made my lips tingle in an awful way. Freddy and Mr. Morales wrestled for way longer than a kid should have been able to, but second grade Freddy kept howling in rage and switching between trying to rip out his other eye and fighting the old boxer. Out of nowhere, Mr. Morales clocked him in the jaw and we all heard the bone snap. Freddy fell back on his butt stunned. Through his broken jaw, he started talking in non-words. They all had the sound and rhythm of real words, but they weren't. Maybe it was his jaw, but I had talked to the other kids for the rest of the week about it because how could a bunch of 6 or 7 or 8-year-olds not talk about it? And everybody said they felt nauseous when Freddy talked, like listening to a song played backwards and sped up. No one in class broke a rule for the rest of their time at school. Janasia works at a local ice cream shop and seems pretty out there. I see her from time to time and she has a tendency to space out. She must carry a bunch of guilt seeing how, and again this comes from Sam, that it was all her fault that they played that stupid dare. She never goes to Downtown Donuts. I don't know if she's banned or if she just doesn't have the nerve to face Mr. and Mrs. Zhang. I sure as heck wouldn't. Freddy hasn't been seen for years and we and everybody from that class think that he broke another rule. Whether it was on purpose or not, I don't know. He acted pretty normal when he came back to school a week later. Maybe it was just a shock that he suffered, having his eye burnt out at such a young age. Maybe it was something else. I think it was something else. I've never heard a person talk like that, broken jaw or not. I still think of all the rules. Number 2 is the worst because it holds the town here. I think if it weren't for the other son making plants grow so well, this place would be deserted, and I would have been born somewhere normal. I haven't seen many people break the rules, but I've never seen somebody go wild like Freddy and Janasia. Most people just crumple up in pain or cry for help. The closest that I've seen anybody come to that level of mania was the Eagle conversationist that came through here in the late 90s, but I think that's a story for later. Man, I feel nauseous right now with thinking about second grade. That's why I'll never break rule number 2. Don't look at the second son. Between my dad and Freddy Zhang, I swore that I would never break a rule, and it took. But that's not the only time I saw a rule breaker. Like I said, I hate this town, it kills the soul. I've gotten numb to the agonies visited on other people. Like the conservationists who rolled through town following a tagged group of bald eagles. I learned about the DDT poisoning of eggs in school. How the eggs broke when they sat on them. We warned them over and over every time they told us what they were doing. I got the distinct impression they thought that we were one of those towns where you hear banjos and run, squeal like a piggy and all that. They humored us on all the other rules, especially after the mayor threatened to run them out if they broke any. They must have really cared about those birds to put up with our dire warnings and strange looks. But they broke rule number 3. I had been given $50 to keep an eye on them and be their town guide. I don't know why at 12 and a half, Navia had decided it was a good job for me, but I think it had to do with the handsome IT guy. Most everybody in town knows where the bird nests are. We make little signs warning people about permanent nests, And besides, it's not like rule number 3 says, don't look at birds. It's don't stare at the birds. Technically, it's only raptors, starlings, and hummingbirds. But nobody wants to be the dope who misidentifies a bird and breaks the rule. As I've told you, the rules have consequences that I feel are pretty severe. There aren't any bird watchers in town for obvious reasons. Those folks that do break a rule, it's pretty rare for them to break it twice. The eagles' nests are very well known. They're in and on the old Winterson barn at the edge of town. A while back, like before I was born, the whole place suffered fire damage and old maid Winterson moved into town instead of restoring it. The frame was still strong and now it was the host of 3 bald eagle nests. Everybody knows about it, everybody avoids it for obvious reasons. Except these conservationists, of course. It's kind of a shame, really. Virtually everybody else in America would be really proud to have such a concentration of bald eagle nests. It really is a thing of wonder. Although in all honesty, if we could look at them for more than a brief glimpse, they probably wouldn't be settled here anyway. I had ridden with them out to the near barn, but they didn't want to startle the eagles with their engine noise, so we walked the last 50 feet or so. I thought that I caught a shadow of movement in the sky a couple times and swiftly looked down at my feet. They stared at their cell phones and tablets, constantly complaining about dropped signals and spotty cell coverage. But that's just how it is out in the country. They were lucky the town even had reliable internet. Nevertheless, handsome IT guy insisted the eagle that they had tagged was nesting nearby. I reminded them to not stare, and it elicited a subdued snickering and knowing glances between team members. I rolled my eyes. People are already dismissive enough of kids' warnings, so they'd begun to rub me the wrong way. Not that I wished that they would break a rule, even though that may have been purely out of self-interest after Freddy and Janasia scarred my innocent youth. The walkout was over uneven pasture. We had gone over a cattle garden through an electrified wire fence, and now faced the vast country danger of cow patties and gopher holes. Cattle raising is not actually that common where we are, our town specifically. There's cattle all over Ohio. Because of the second sun we get sometimes and the way that it affects crops, people tend to farm instead. But the old maid Winterson would collect quite a sum for grazing rights because the grass grew tall and green too. I've talked a lot about old maid Winterson, but this is kind of all I know about her. She's a shrewd, clever, and ruthless businesswoman who occasionally plays favorites. I don't think she's bad though, just really dedicated to business above all else. What wasn't useful she abandoned, of course. With what I just said about her, it shouldn't come as a surprise she didn't let her old farm go without collecting income. I just didn't know it at 12 and a half what was going on, you see. Never would I have taken those conservationists out to the old barn if I had. As we walked, the IT guy kept checking his metal boxy thing with. He said he had a piece of software that mixed satellite data with the pings coming off the tag. Sounded like magic to me. If I'm honest, it still kind of does. We kept following his pinging gizmo even though I told them how to get to the nest. Don't look at the birds when we get there, okay? It really doesn't end well. The leader, a small woman who I now recognize was a grad student, smiled patronizingly. Hey kiddo, I know the town's rules are really important to y'all, but they're really going to get in the way of our research. We can't say it's here if we don't see it now, can we? The IT guy piped up in a sarcastic voice. Well, technically, using my tag tracker we can. The woman cut him off. You know what I mean, Fabio. We could have taken the readings on the tag tracker back to the hotel, but if we don't visually confirm that it didn't just fall off here, it doesn't count. She smiled at me knowingly. I don't want to get kicked out of town, but I just can't not look at the eagle. How about I buy you a toy? What kind of toys do you like? Ren and Stimpy, I answered automatically. G.I. Joe and Batman the animated series. I used the whole name to make clear which toys, but my enthusiasm fell. You won't do it though, not if you break a rule. Of course I will. Her voice was pseudo-parental, the kind people who don't see kids much use. I wouldn't break that promise, you just can't tell. This stuff is important, you know. Yeah, chimed in another girl, probably a second year if I were to guess now. These are bald eagles, the symbol of America, and they're dying. She put on a really silly voice, like some kind of 50s gangster. What are you, some commie? The cute IT guy socked her in the shoulder. Don't be lame. A society where we work for the benefit of each other rather than landlords and owners is. He began, but she cut him off. Now shut up, Remus. You take too many philosophy classes. She sneered back. They began to bicker, fading into the background of my periphery. Breaking rules isn't a joke. Bad things happen to people when they break the rules here. Not the laws, the rules. It can be really awful and there's nothing you can do once you've broken it. I stared at my walking feet, the cool plastic toy slipping further from my future. The grad student stopped and kneeled down. Kid, she said quietly like a spy, do they hurt you if you break a rule, I mean? The look in her eyes was so sincere that I stopped disliking her. Memories of Dad in second grade tugged at my heart. It just sucks here. I held back tears to try and be big. The rules always hurt people and take away people like my dad. The grad student, Mariana, I think, cocked her head and brushed my hair back soothingly. And now I don't have a mom or dad, just Navia, and I want everything just to be normal again. A bubble of snot may or may not have formed under my nostril. All right, sweetheart, all right. All patronization faded away into sincerity and concern. After we handle these birds, you can come back to our motel room and we'll figure out what to do, okay? And we'll definitely find you a G.I. Joe. What do you think of Scarlet? I liked Scarlet and her cool crossbow, so I smiled and nodded. Just don't break the rule, okay? I don't want you to get hurt. You're nice. She smiled and patted my head without answering. She and one of the other students, Remus or maybe the other college guy, shared a meaningful look. He tousled my hair and offered me one of his energy bars. I felt safer, but I could not stop feeling that they were going to break the rule and leave. The peanut saltiness and chocolatey sweetness calmed me down somewhat. It was a lot of walking for a 12-and-a-half-year-old. 15 minutes after our heart-to-heart, the handsome IT guy got excited. The little blip on his gizmo was pinging its way towards us. I immediately scanned the sky for the shape of the bird, not so that I could stare obviously, but so that I could know where to avoid. I saw the dark winged flapping while it was still tiny and immediately turned to face the conservationists. I reminded them of the rule again, but nobody was listening. Their concern over my plight temporarily forgotten. They were all staring at the approaching bird, congratulating each other and quietly whooping for joy. Looking back, I wish that I had timed it. Everybody would have appreciated knowing exactly how long you had to look to break the rule. I didn't know, so I didn't know how long except maybe 20-ish seconds. One by one, the conservationists were knocked down as something struck their chest. I couldn't see anything, but I knew that it had to be there. Small rips on their shirts implied talons, their frantic head jerking and hands swatting at nothing. Small gouges appeared on their hands and forearms. Blood was flowing freely from their wounds and dyeing their shirts in the grass below. I started crying and knowing better than to look around. I kept my eyes focused on the team. The handsome IT guy was the first to shout in surprise, their reasoning briefly paralyzed by the suddenness of the attack. His left eye was crushed and yanked out by the same invisible force. Optic nerve and artery pulled to the breaking point. The snap was wet and heralded a chain reaction of others losing the fight. One by one through all 6 people, the eyes were yanked out, nerves and arteries snapped and disappeared. Once the last one was lost, I went about bandaging their heads with the gauze that I had brought, on the suspicion that they wouldn't listen. A 12-and-a-half-year-old shouldn't be comfortable providing first aid for a lost eye. I found that out in college. Not everybody has detailed first and second aid skills directly related to eye damage and loss. Everybody was shocked when my girlfriend at the time fell while buzzed and smashed her eye on a rock. Then came the questions. Why do you carry gauze? Well, paranoia. Where did you learn to do that? First grade through 12th. Did you know she was going to get hurt? I always think somebody could. Were you a Boy Scout? Nope. Are you sure that it will help? Absolutely. She'll see again just fine. What kind of school teaches that? Don't they all, and why do you need to know that? Why wouldn't I? Even after their eyes were gone, they just writhed there, whimpering and crying about how cold they were. Everyone except Mariana. She was laying stock still while I bandaged her eye, the right eye boring a hole through my soul. It's so cold. Should it be cold? I looked back into the bloody but undamaged eye. I don't know, maybe. It was cold when my dad broke a rule. Freddie and Janasia complained about the cold. She never moved her eye from mine. I don't break the rules. I told you not to. I told you that bad things would happen. Utterly calm, she answered. What about the eyes? Should they be there? I feel them looking at me, looking all over, taking me in. Dark pupils dancing over meat. Hungry eyes, jealous eyes, desperate eyes. Spiteful, spiteful eyes. Why are there eyes? She snatched the collar of my new denim jacket, getting stained the faded blue-brown with her blood. I looked back in shock. No one had been coherent after breaking a rule that I know of ever. I don't know, you're scaring me. I pulled back, but even the strongest 12-and-a-half-year-old couldn't break the grip of a grown woman. Rugged and strong from deep woods backpacking in the name of conservation. You're scaring me. Shut up, shut up, shut up. I couldn't help it. I grabbed a fist-sized rock, digging into my knee and smashing her in the head. Her eyes rolled up in the back of her head and her jaw went slack. I pried the fingers off my jacket one by one. It wasn't easy, they were latched on like steel bands, and I'm sure that I heard one crack. I moved on to gently tend to the last two. Once they were all expertly wrapped in gauze, I ran all the way back to town. It was getting to evening when I finally got to the house. I was listening for the bells the whole time, not having a wristwatch of my own. I had tried to take it apart and Navia wouldn't buy me another one until Wednesday. They tolled at 8:07 like always, and I shut my eyes and dropped to my knees. The 8:26 bells tolled and I finally reached a house. There they called the doc and he arrived in his beat-up station wagon ambulance 25 minutes later. We got back to them just after dark. I held his flashlight, one of those big 6-volt lantern types, and it still felt too dim. As I led him out to the field, I could hear even more crying. We ran stumbling over divots and stones until they came into view. One of them, the handsome IT guy Remus, was dead. The eagles were sitting on his corpse, pulling at the soft meat on his face. The other 5 were huddled together, weak and scared. The doc reached them first despite his aged legs. I held the light on as he tended to them, congratulating me on my wrapping. We just ignored the eagles. They're endangered still after all, and Remus was already dead. That seems cold. I told you this place kills the soul. The rest of the night was uneventful by comparison. Mariana and 2 of the others helped everybody to the station wagon ambulance while the doc and I helped drag Remus on a stretcher. The eagles left right when I put the light on them. They looked really mad, though I didn't really care if he got ate, but the doc said it wasn't right. They made a few dive bomb passes at us, and that is a heck of a feeling. After 2 or 3 goes at it, they soared back to their nests. Neither the doc nor I looked at the birds for longer than necessary to keep safe. I'll never forget the way the conservationists looked at me on the ride back. A mix of revulsion and horror, like I was the cause of their suffering because I had warned them. I had borne the bad news and they saw me as thoroughly cursed. Mariana specifically kept boring into me with that eye. I think that hurt the most. She had been kind to me. She had understood where I was growing up wasn't right and I deserved to be treated better. She probably thought that I was being beaten or maybe the town was some big conspiracy or something. But she knew a child was living in unfit conditions and wanted to help me. But now she glared as though I had tempted her into danger, tricking her into breaking the 3rd rule. Well, that's the reason I never break rule number 3. Don't stare at the birds. By now I bet a lot of you are trying to figure out what's going on. With each advancement in technology we've tried, VHS camcorders, digital cameras, video recording, cell phone cameras recording on every street corner, infrared recording. We've also tried a lot of thought experiments. Seal somebody in a box with an air tank, wearing a welding mask, sealing somebody in a diving suit, standing just outside the rule zone watching somebody inside the rule zone, getting buried and unburied, and so on and so on. I don't know the outcome of every experiment, but I know they generally ended in favor of people getting hurt. One time, and they showed this video to every incoming and outgoing high school class, somebody taped themselves using an atmosphere diving suit. It's an old VHS. He smiled so confidently going in, ready to beat the world. I don't know if living in a diving suit would really be worth it. I mean the big ones with the old bronze sphere for a head. No way anything was getting in that self-contained monstrosity. He had air tanks and everything. At 8:11, the video shows a spurt of red blood hitting the inside of the glass porthole thingy. I'm sure that it's not the name, but I live in the middle of Ohio farm country, sue me. At 8:26, people rush over to help him and bloody drops fall out of the open diving mask like a tipped bucket. Not a lot of us get college degrees, and even fewer come back here when they do. You can't bring friends or significant others home. If anything, you try to visit them and their family. Another spring break of not having to close your eyes at the drop of a hat is reason enough to stick with a dead-end date. Writing that down feels a little shameful, but I don't care. I've done it, and I would have done it again if I hadn't graduated single. I would have moved in with somebody if it meant not coming back here. In fact, I seriously considered going homeless in Tennessee instead of coming home. Knoxville has a lot of different charities set up to care for the homeless, and life could be much worse than sleeping in homeless shelters and begging for a few bucks. It hurt my pride too much in the end to take up the same space as people who actually had no other choice, when my life at home was just difficult. I did bring home a significant other once. She was a year younger than me, but at the same point in her degree. She was smart as a whip and genuinely believed in the supernatural. I opened up to her at one point about our town's rules. I had received a call from Navia and Duke at 7:45, and it had gone long. Navia slammed the receiver down at 8:09. We had been on speakerphone. Zainab being absolutely adored by Navia, but it startled Zainab. I had been living on campus for 2 years, staying over the summer by working at the ag department as a gardener to keep my campus housing. Zainab stayed with me even though she wasn't technically allowed to, but our RA was her cousin and would turn a blind eye. I didn't mean that to be a pun. It had been long enough that I didn't reflexively think of 8:10 as a rule. I hadn't forgotten, it just wasn't automatic. After thinking a minute, I smacked my forehead and exclaimed, "Oh, rule number 1, right." That was the beginning of an uncomfortable conversation. Zainab was intrigued. "What's rule number 1?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. My guard went up instantly. Just some silly hometown thing. It's a superstition," I lied. Maybe I'm a bad liar, or maybe Zainab is just as smart as I said. "Your stepmom isn't superstitious," she said. "What? You're crazy, how do you know that?" I was already on the back foot after 2 exchanges and already knew where this was going. "We talk when you're at class or work. She calls to talk to me." She waggled her eyebrows. "She said that she likes me better than you." I gawped at her and she shrugged. "I mean, I'm not surprised, you do snore." Sensing a chance to completely change the topic, I grabbed at it with all that I had. "What do you mean she calls you when I'm not here? On purpose?" Zainab grinned, and I loved that grin. "Yeah, she does. I talked to her about my father, who's extremely superstitious. I hear him whispering that I would get accepted to an American college 40 times the night that I sent my applications out. He always carries a black cloth because of the black cat that lives nearby, and he has never in his entire life entered a house with his left foot. And that necklace you love when I wear it naked, She raised her dark eyebrows. It's supposed to protect against the evil eye. She staggered forward, arms out, her voice warbling with mock horror. Her moaning ended in giggles. "Why didn't she tell me?" I stammered. "Why didn't you tell me that you had been talking to Navia?" Zainab smiled and shrugged in that arrogant way that she did. "Why are you trying not to tell me about your town's rules?" My breath whooshed out. "I don't really want to talk about it, babe," I said, shyly looking away. "It's uncomfortable." She put a hand on my chest and said my name in a tone that rattled down my spine. "You have nothing to fear from me, Gazlarem." I sank onto my bunk and Zainab descended beside me. "You're going to think I'm crazy," I said, deflating. "Maybe," she said, "but then I will love a crazy man." With a deep break, I recounted to her the rules of my town and the different things I knew happened to people who break them. I started slow and spared her the details that I hadn't spared here. The dark ones or the sickliness that I felt witnessing them. That's not to say that I spared her the full danger of breaking them, I just didn't make it sound gross. When I stopped talking and rambling like I do here sometimes, she stared at me in silence for a long time, and then she put her arms around me and hugged me. Not the sensual hug that she used when she was aroused or the sad hug she would give me when Duke called to tell me that they had put down my old dog. Just a solid hug, one that implied a lending of stability and strength. I cried, I think, although I don't remember crying, just tears running down my cheeks as I was able to stop holding in my hometown's weighty problems. "We'll visit your hometown together next summer," she said. I tried to jerk out of her hug, but she held me tight. She was an accomplished softballer and enjoyed boxing. Yeah, I hit my girlfriend, but it was okay because she dropped her guard. No, she said as I began to protest. "I will go with you and we will follow the rules. I will follow the rules." Her eyes locked on mine. Beautiful eyes of rich brown flecked with golden hues. "I don't want you to, you'll get hurt. That town kills the soul." "Navia and Duke have missed you so much. She can't leave the bar unmanaged in Duke. She says that Duke can't be trusted to drive long distances without spacing out. Family is important and we're going to visit yours." Her voice was strung like a steel cable, flexing without giving an inch. "And next year, you can visit my family. We have all sorts of rules and one of them is very definitely, don't marry a white American boy. It'll be fun." I cried for a while and Zainab just held me until I relented. I kept hoping that she might forget by next summer, or maybe we would be broken up by then, or maybe she would just find the idea of rural nowhere Ohio uninteresting. Unfortunately for her, she didn't forget. Her conversations with Navia became more common, happening once a week. Navia had been extremely gun-shy about the idea at first, until Zainab admitted that I had talked about the rules. She then comforted my stepmother with the knowledge that she was a firm believer in the supernatural, discussing when she fought off a Karabasti that had been torturing her sister with wicked dreams and crushing the life from her as she slept, or when she had learned to guard her village's historic 13th century Ottoman well frequented by visitors. Within was a chesma yasi that tempted children into climbing in and drowning. She ignored the creature's soothing calls while catching little tourist kids who tried to climb up it. In time, Navia, Duke, and Zainab were all on board with the visit, leaving me the odd man out. By the end of the semester, my grades were suffering as I tried to cope with the stress of taking her to that town, this town. I finished with my lowest grades yet and forcing that 5th bank draining semester. However, Zainab was thrilled. "You remember the bells for Rule 1, yes?" I asked nervously in my 1990 GMC Sierra, rolling down a state route towards town. "Closed at 8:09 and open at 8:26. "Check," was all she said, a look of calm and ease about her. "Don't even look up from noon to 1:30, okay? I know you have to look at the second sun, but if you look up your eye will probably be drawn to it. Check, again." Birds, don't even look at birds. Close your eyes if you have to. I thought for a second. It's polite to call out a bird if one flies into your view. Just turn around and call out the bird. Everybody will appreciate that. Check. And remember that. I remember, Gazlaram. I remember. I promise that I won't break a rule. God, I know, I just worry about you. Besides, you're already going to stick out like a sore thumb. Our town is probably better than most about foreigners, but there's always a few pricks. I glanced at her in the passenger seat, window down, and palm flat outside, gliding up and down with the air current. And watch out for Jed Kirklich. He hates anyone who looks Middle Eastern. He'll probably start shouting Al-Qaeda at you. She was so beautiful in that moment, I wish that I had taken a picture. Cell phone cameras were sort of new and I hadn't bought one. No cell reception in the country wouldn't have been worth it. Sun gleaming off her dark hair and relaxed smile. I stopped well outside the rule zone at 7:45. We don't have to go, you know, Navia will understand, and Duke will probably forget you were coming at all in a week. We could turn around and get a hotel in Cincinnati. It'd be cheaper in Dayton, but you're worth the best that I could buy. That wasn't a whole lot, but I didn't say it. We wouldn't have to get dressed all summer, you and me. Hey, I know you're scared. She put her hand on my arm, but I promise that I'll follow the rules. She leaned awkwardly across the center console and kissed me lightly. Look, I even set an alarm on my phone. I glanced at the screen, confirming her statement as fact. I relented and took her into town. The phone started beeping at 8:05 and the 8:10 bell rang at 8:08. I stopped the truck, held her hand, and closed my eyes. We talked, but I spent most of my time warning her to keep her eyes closed. It felt like forever, but she did it. At 8:26, the bell rang and I opened my eyes, tracking over her face to be sure that it was true. Both eyes were there and she smiled at me. And dinner with Navia and Duke went well. To this day, Navia laughs and says she would trade me for Zainab any day. Duke was in rare form, even got out his guitar and sang some Western songs and even a jazz number that he had learned. I was incredibly hopeful. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't see a long-term future with her and the children and a house far away from this place. I was setting her up in the bathroom with her toothpaste and hair care accessories and whatnot, giving her little kisses. I held her hand as the 8:08 bell rang and we closed her eyes. I didn't feel the awful suffocating fear that I did in the truck. The 8:26 bell rang and I looked at her in the mirror. She smiled back and winked, making a deeply sensual face. I turned to her, eager to make my advance, when I saw that her face was not sensual but shocked, mouth agape at her sultry reflection. My mind raced to shout, but I could barely get it out. "Break it! Rule 4, break it!" squeaked my voice. "But it's your stepmom's," she cried plaintively. "Break it!" I screamed at her. She had frozen, staring at her increasingly inaccurate reflection. I snatched up a rock with the number 4 embossed on it and a glittery gold and swung for the mirror, but it was too late. Mir Zainab whipped her forward in the reflection. Zainab turned and ran as the rock connected. As I turned, I saw her stumble and fall, spinning as she went down, her eyes straining against the connections of its arteries and nerves. And then as I saw in the glitter of Mir flying past, reflection Zainab clenched her hand into a brutal fist. Zainab's eye burst in a gooey crush, like a popped water balloon, and it vanished. I held Zainab still as Navia arrived to bandage her face. It took my full farm boy weight to prevent her from thrashing as Navia wrapped the cup bottom in gauze around her broken socket. Duke snapped out of his trance on the couch, looking oddly for a moment before springing for the phone. The doc was there in 35 minutes, lightning fast for our country town. I rode in the station wagon ambulance all the way to our ocular surgery ward, pain that I couldn't be in the back with her. As I sat in the waiting room while he and the nurse operated, I swore on everything in my life. I would never break that rule, not after Zainab. I would be the thing that drove her away, drove her out of my life. I hate rule number 4, not in the clinical way that I hate rule 2, but in a deeply personal, spiteful way. If your reflection looks off, break it. Zainab left as soon as she could. Her new glass eye lacked the warmth that she had carried the last 2 years of our relationship. I don't know how long my heart hurt after that. I know that I cried a lot in my room. Navia and Duke were very understanding. I left town a week later, hugging my step-parents tightly and promising to never come back. And they understood. Navia cried a little and Duke told me that he was proud and gave me his old eye patch the way families pass down special heirlooms. I laughed and he looked at me oddly before zoning out again. As soon as the 8:26 bell rang, I was out on the road again. I tried to make contact with Zainab again, but she avoided me and I really couldn't blame her. I wound up next to her in class my senior year, the first senior year thanks to my stress from before she came home with me, and she apologized for fleeing. She said that it was too frightening when the mirror ripped her eye out, and seeing me just reminded her of that moment. She loved me, but still couldn't bear to see me every day. She gave me a light kiss on the cheek and switched classes before the next session. I stopped trying to see her after that, as much as it hurt. I swore over and over again throughout my life that I would never break a rule, but I did. After a week of being home from graduation, I was faced with rule number 5, which is probably the hardest to follow. Don't get me wrong, keeping your eyes closed for extended periods, not looking up or at birds, and breaking mirrors in a hunch is pretty frustrating. But they don't get as bad as Rule 5. Rule 5 hurts. I got up one morning in the middle of summer to head out to my shift at Winterson Seed and Feed. I had taken over my dad's first position from a long time ago managing deliveries. I pulled on my jeans and boots and a University of Tennessee t-shirt. The WSNF hat my dad had left behind years ago was still there, hanging up on my bedroom wall. I grabbed it, tired of letting it be the past, and I went into work. The feed store is just on the edge of town, but people congregate there buying and selling, so it's got a big parking lot to accommodate not just numbers but also tractors and 18-wheelers. I parked near the back and made my way in the employee door when Old Maid Winterson intercepted me. "Hey kid," she snapped. I usually don't let people call me kid, but she is Old Maid Winterson. "Yes ma'am," I replied, not looking her in the eye. "I need a delivery received at the old farm. I'll pay you $1.25 to manage it." "The old farm, ma'am, I don't really," I started. "I'm not asking, kid. Don't let me down. Grab 2 of the dropouts and take them with you. You can take the rest of the day off when you're done." She smiled, what I think she meant to be a generous one, but it didn't sit right on her. "Okay, ma'am. Is it alright if I take Jeb and DeMarcus?" "I leave Jeb. His mom's coming by for feed this afternoon and she buys more when he's visible. Take the Donahue boy." "Okay, ma'am. What time is the delivery?" 8:26 sharp. Her impatience was beginning to show. 8:26, ma'am, but what about rule number 1? "You can leave out at 7:45 if you're worried, but you need to be ready by 8:26. "Yes, ma'am." I think my voice broke a little bit and she gave me a stern look before heading off to find more work to do. I think as long as there is work to be done, Old Maid Winterson will be alive. I've never heard of her taking a day off or getting sick. She's always managing something or someone. I let DeMarcus Smith and Lionel Donahue know what we were doing. Neither of them was enthusiastic. Neither of them were willing to confront Old Maid Winterson either though, so we resigned ourselves to fate. I finished receiving a couple bushels of hay around 7:30 and I went to find the boys. It turns out that Lionel had begged off home with a fever, which I figured was a load of crap. Pissed at him for abandoning us, and there was not another dropout available, as Old Maid Winterson called them. I took DeMarcus and resigned myself to some manual labor. We were cruising by 750 and breaking every speed limit that we passed. Neither of us wanted to do this, and neither of us wanted to be at the old farm eyes shut for 15 minutes. DeMarcus spent the ride asking me about college girls, what they were like, if they really were more easy than high school girls. I think. I was glad to reach the old farm and end the conversation, as only the most salacious factoids would satisfy his curiosity. The old farm was just as run down as it had been when the conservationists had come out. The nests were still there, and both DeMarcus and I avoided looking at them religiously. "Where's this delivery coming from?" he asked me. "I don't know, honestly. Old Maid Winterson ever sent somebody out here to receive her before?" Not that I know of, at least. I've only been working since the fall, though." "Does she ever do anything else weird?" I glanced at his face and saw the discomfort. "Nah," was his one-syllable reply, but it looked like a lie. "Come on, man, don't lie to me. We're alone at the old farm and both trying hard as heck to not break rule number 3. "I don't know, sometimes she has meetings with Mayor Vickers. I think that's weird, but it's not like it's illegal or anything." "Well, this isn't illegal either, DeMarcus." "Yeah," he said and stopped talking. The 8:09 bells were loud and clear even out here. We sat down and we shut our eyes out of habit. Neither of us said a word. Talking can be a little dangerous for rule number 1. If you say something surprising, the other person might look out of reflex, and you know what the cost is. In the silence, I felt the cool wind moving my shirt and pricking up the hairs on my arm and neck. I heard the eagle chicks squawking for food and the beat of great wings. There were grasshoppers chirping everywhere, which felt off for early morning for some reason that I wasn't sure about. DeMarcus broke the silence, and I clenched my eyes shut against the reflex to look at him. "This isn't right. Something is very not right." "Wait for the bell, DeMarcus." "No way, don't you feel it? It's gonna be bad." "I know I feel it, but calm down and wait for the bell." No. My mom ignored that feeling and never came home." His voice raised in pitch, squeaking out of him. 1 minute it's, "Hold on, baby, something feels off," and then it's all screaming about the cold. I heard him stand, feet unsteady with eyes closed. I felt him feeling around with his hands until one brushed my shoulder. "You've got to forgive me, man, but I'm getting out of here." "Wait for the bell, DeMarcus. Wait for the bell and I'll give you a ride." But I already heard unsteady feet walking away. Tentative boots on grass and uneven steps. "DeMarcus, just wait," I shouted. "You're going to fall, then break rule number 1. I wanted to open my eyes and I wanted to see where he was, but I swore that I wouldn't. My father's empty eye socket glared at me through 13 years like he was right in front of me. I kept my eyes shut, even when I heard the exclamation of surprise, even when I heard the impact of a body on wet grass and the grunt of lost breath, even when the shout of surprise and ensuing screaming jangled my nerves to jitters. The 8:26 bells couldn't be late, could they? They couldn't be damaged or off. Did I miss them with all of DeMarcus's screaming and whimpering and complaints of the abject cold? The temptation to open my eyes had rarely been stronger. Zeynep's surprised cry echoed through my memory and I squeezed my eyes tighter. DeMarcus was calling my name, screaming anew as I heard the flapping of great wings and raptor cries. "Rule number 3, I shouted, eyes still closed. I slowly pulled myself onto all fours, crawling in the direction of the screams. DeMarcus became so all-encompassing that he seemed to come from everywhere. I had to be close. I could see the conservationists, the cute IT guy Remy or Ronald or something with an R, being casually taken away. Swinging my arm out back and forth, I felt for his body. He had stopped screaming some seconds ago and I couldn't finesse his location out. I was sure the 8:26 bell should have rung already, but I didn't dare open my eyes. Finally, I felt the dampness of wet cloth and the rise and fall of ragged breathing. "DeMarcus?" I queried. No answer. "Hey, snap out of it," I said, jostling him roughly. Why hadn't the bell rung? I heard the pained groan from a little to the right. I ran my hand lightly over the cloth until I found the scrubby growth of his soul patch. That annoying look that he was always trying to show off, like a dozen scraggly chin hairs counted as facial hair. "DeMarcus, come on." His head flopped away from my hand, and then the bells rang 8:26. My eyes snapped open to see him there. I reached around his head and tilted it back towards me. Both of his sockets were bare. One was surgically executed, arteries and nerves neatly severed. The other ragged and torn as though pecked at for many minutes. The growl of a truck engine shocked me and I nearly fell. "Stay here, DeMarcus, we'll get the doc." He muttered something and I took it for acknowledgement. Racing back to the driveway, I saw a short tractor trailer with no logo. Hey, call the doc. My boy just broke rules 1 and 3, he needs the doc." 2 men looked at me visibly confused. "Here's the shipping list," one said, a rather thin trucker with tattoos on his face and a grizzly mustache. I said, "Get the doc, DeMarcus is hurt." I shouted again, only 5 long strides away. He said, "Here's the shipping list." The other one said, taller than the other with the same build. His face was free of tattoos but adorned with a nasty burn scar. "I don't care about the list, get the doc." They looked at each other oddly, like they just didn't understand the concept. "The shipping list," the shorter one began again. "The doc," I screamed. "The doc, the doctor, get the doctor." Puzzled expressions and silence reigned. It was then that I could see their eyes were shiny, not wet like normal, but shiny like glass. The sun reflected off of them too well and too solidly. I could make out its blazing star form and brilliance in reflection. "Here's the shipping list," the other man said, staring straight ahead. "What? Who are you guys?" "The shipping list is right here," said the shorter one again. I took the list out of their hands, half exasperated, half furious. There were no words on it, just unintelligible scratches of ink. DeMarcus forgotten, I went to the back of the trailer and jerked on the handle. A padlock rattled in response. "You guys going to unlock it?" I asked. They weren't out front of the truck anymore. I saw them in my peripheral. "Oh, I didn't know you followed me. Say, do you have a phone?" My hair was electric, standing on end. "I need to call someone." They looked at each other again and nothing said. "We can unload the truck." "Phone," I grouched. "I need a phone." "You want us to unload?" the other said in response. I felt sick. DeMarcus was dying and these weirdos with 2 fake eyes weren't right. "Sure, let me check my car," I said, keeping my eyes on them as I backed up slowly. As if reflexive, one unlatched the trailer and the other slid the door up. Once I felt the truck's liftgate against my back, I moved my feet, sliding around without taking my eyes off the men. "DeMarcus," I called. "I haven't forgotten you, bud. I'll get you the doc." Reaching in, I got one hand on my cell phone and the other on my 12 gauge. Keeping the barrel down, I checked that it was loaded and called the doc. Astonished that I was at the bar and he ordered me to stay. I could hear him running on his ancient legs as we talked. I hung up and slid the phone into my left pocket. "The doc's on his way, DeMarcus. Just hold on, pal." I dropped a Ziploc of buckshot into my right pocket and slowly eased around the side of the truck again. Back in view of the trailer, I saw the cargo. People, blind in both eyes and some still seeping blood, were being gently helped out and directed towards the barn cellar. Transfixed, I watched as 7 people in total were shepherded down the storm door stairs to below. I heard from down there a soft murmur. I poked my head in looking around and saw dozens upon dozens of people standing silently transfixed on nothing. Not an eye among them. I staggered and tripped on my way back out, scrambling on the grass until I had reached DeMarcus. "We have got to go," I said, approaching, but he wasn't there. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around. "David," someone said. I turned around to answer my name in the glow of the late morning. I was stunned. DeMarcus? He stood behind me, staring straight through my soul. "David," he said. "David." I stared hard into his empty sockets and then I remembered rule number 5. "No, DeMarcus," I whimpered. "No, no, no." His voice was the same, but his inflection, his tone, his impressions were alien to the boy that I knew. The tough high school dropout, tempted by the money at Winterson's. "You're not him." He repeated my name again, agitated. I looked down at the shotgun and contemplated blowing off his head. Putting another round in his knee maybe just to keep him from running me down. But I thought of every rule breaker that I had seen. Would it have saved them? I sighed and let the gun swing at my hip. "Okay, DeMarcus, okay, rule 5. I pressed my own fingers against the underside of my left eyelid, pushing past the unbearable agony I felt at this first insignificant step. I pressed and pressed until one slipped under the eyelid and behind my eye. I collapsed to my knees, crying great, heaving sobs of pain and bitterness. I pried then, pinky straining against the soft squish of my eyeball. I felt tension in places that I didn't know I could feel. Nerves being first touched by the outside world, shrieking in pain and fire. I thunked from my knees to my side as I pressed on, prying my living eyeball from its socket. Screaming too high and too frenzied for me to believe that I could make it echoed around the field. A second finger slid into the socket. Air rushed into the sealed space, bringing new pain and new agonies. "You!" I shrieked. Everything went black for a second, and I woke up just a little while later, eyes still behind the socket. "You son of a..." I howled as the first minor nerve snapped. A domino effect, nerve after nerve, breaking free as I pulled. The eye was free of my socket, now dangling in the fresh air. White-hot, furious pain lodged itself in my skull, setting my head on fire. "I hate you, I hate this town, I hate the rules. I hate. The eye came free, artery spraying blood on the grass. Holding the precious orb forward, I offered it to DeMarcus. "Here's your frickin' eye." DeMarcus bent down and took it, his sockets unflinching to my plight. With a smooth motion, he popped it into his mouth and swallowed. He turned and walked into the barn cellar without another word. Slowly, I could feel the presence of eyes. I looked around frantically, but my vision was racked. Overlapping views vied for my brain's focus, creating a mad chaos. I closed my remaining eye, staring out through God knows what. It was inky black, the kind of black that implied shadows which weren't there. All around, I saw what were, for lack of a better word, eyes. They fixated on me, and I felt small and insignificant. They had no apparatus for expressing feeling, no eyebrow or face or eyelid to slant or tilt or close. And yet they expressed something all the same. Hunger. I could feel the word in my soul as sharply as it being announced over an intercom. Spite. The feeling reverberated in my bones, hunting down every nerve and setting it off wrong. Desperation. Gnawing at my gut and begging for release, I knew there was nothing the eyes were not capable of. I felt myself hoisted up into the air, a dozen hands holding me firmly. I opened the other eye again and disjointed images overlapped and churned. The eyelids were carrying me down. One hand still held, white-knuckled tight to the shotgun, the other grasping for a safe hold. I felt the eyes get closer, closing in around me. I closed my eye again and searched. There was my father's gentle green. Far away on the other side was Zainab's deep hazel. I was drawn to a set of 6, and I could see the piercing gaze of Mariana, the conservationist. Amongst the eyes were many. I assumed Freddie and Janaja's were there as well, though I didn't know them well enough to find them. There came a fourth sensation, something that I hadn't felt from the eyes yet. Something that I had never heard anybody speak of. It was a feeling so utterly shocking that I nearly dropped the 12 gauge. Triumph. The eyes stared all around me in victory, in conquest, in mastery over all. I was a prize, a gift. They stared greedily at their trophy moving further into the cellar. I was being passed along like a demented crowd surfer towards some place that I did not wish to go. I locked stares with my father's green, comforting iris. Even the harshness of the eye's emotion did not dull the gentle feeling that I felt there. I turned to Zainab's haze and counted the golden flecks within. The cruelty of this thing could not dull their beauty. There was an immense pressure like a sinus headache all throughout my soul. Something pushing, pulling, prying to get in, just as I had pried out my own blessed eye. A pinprick slipped into my mind and raced through me. I felt the eye's emotion so much more vividly, so much more clearly. I felt nuance that hadn't radiated. Gasping for air, I finally touched the stone of the cellar floor. I knew that something wanted in because it was already in, filling up the places that I filled, pushing me out of the places that belonged to me. I no longer remembered what. What did I not remember? There was a hole where my memory should be. I felt myself start to drift, cut loose inside myself. My hand raised the shotgun barrel to my chin. This was mine, this was me, this I controlled. I felt confusion scramble my thoughts. What was I holding? How did it work and what was it for? Freedom, I said out loud. It's for freedom. The space between me and myself shivered at the thought. It wanted more, it wanted freedom more than anything. Squeeze, I said aloud. Squeeze the first finger. A harsh glee thrummed through not me as it sought the satisfaction of freedom. My fingers squeezed and I was finally free of the rules. Because of Rule 5, I didn't have to worry about the rules anymore. Don't look into the eyes of the eyeless. It was a sleepy summer's day in my hometown when Frank Wallace opened his front door and stepped out onto the street. I was sitting on my porch opposite holding a cold bottle of beer against my cheek. It was too hot to do anything else in my humble opinion. Frank was in his 60s and had owned the bar on Main Street until he sold it last fall. He lived on his own and life as a single retired gentleman seemed to be suiting him just fine. I'd see him strolling in town with a lady on his arm or sitting in the park reading a book with a contented smile on his face. Frank was usually smartly turned out as well, favoring pressed shirts, bow ties, and waistcoats, but he was wearing a creased, collarless shirt with braces. One of the braces was unbuckled and hung loose. I thought how it wasn't like Frank to be so scruffy, but it was too hot to dwell on this, so I forgot about it and raised an arm to say hello. Frank did not acknowledge my wave. He was just standing there looking lost. This was not so easy to brush off. I was concerned. I wondered if Frank's AC was not working, if the heat was making him feel ill and he had come outside to try and find some relief. There was none to be found out on the street though. I got to my feet and called out, "Hey Frank, you okay? You want to come over for a cold one in the shade?" Frank's gaze drifted towards me. His mouth opened slightly as if he was about to say something, and then he fell to his knees. It all happened so quick. I froze for a moment in shock and then dropped my beer and started to run towards him to help. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw another one of my neighbors hurrying forwards as well. Lorna Johnson had been a nurse at a city center ER before moving to the town, and after seeing her I thought, whatever is wrong, it's going to be okay. And then Frank began to scream. It was hideous, sounding more like a wild animal crying out in fear and pain than a man. Lorna had reached Frank's side, but I could see that she was hesitating. Even with her experience as a nurse, she was clearly shocked by the way that he was screaming. But she set her face in a determined expression, put a hand on his shoulder and began to speak to him. Frank didn't seem to know that she was there. He reached up and touched his face, and then he began to rake his fingernails down his skin, leaving vivid red lines in their wake. He raked his fingernails down again and again, and I could see blood flowing now where he was cutting open his own skin. Lorna was trying to stop him by grabbing his wrist, but he was far too strong for her. "Help me," she said. A crowd had gathered now, drawn out of their houses by Frank's hideous screams, but I realized she was speaking to me because I was the closest. I stumbled up to Frank and took a hold of one of his arms. I could see the blood and skin under his fingernails and the ragged lines of raw flesh that had been exposed in his face. A wave of nausea rushed through me, and I was fighting not to puke as I tried to help restrain Frank. We couldn't stop him though. He was frantic and kept scratching at himself viciously. It was like he was trying to claw his own skin off. "Frank, stop it," I pleaded, but he remained oblivious. His eyes were glazed over and froth was appearing at the corners of his mouth as he continued to scream and claw. Mercifully, more people were stepping up to try and help. I glanced to my side to see Bill Monroe, the deputy. He was trying to handcuff Frank and had one cuff around Frank's wrist. I put all my strength into trying to keep Frank's free arm still enough for Bill to get the other restraint on. He did, and he locked them. I breathed a momentary sigh of relief. At least Frank could not hurt himself anymore. And no matter how much he thrashed around now, the sheer weight of people holding him down was keeping him pinned to the ground. Bill said, "I'll call an ambulance, but until that gets here, I want Frank off the street, and a holding cell is the best place that I can think to put him in just now." Sweat dripped from his face as he spoke, and I could hear the tension in his voice. The worst that he usually had to deal with was traffic violations and folk who had too much to drink on a Friday night. He was out of his depth here, but he was right about the cell as far as I could see. After Doc Wilson had lost his medical license last year due to his need to keep topped up with bourbon to hold the shakes at bay, there wasn't a doctor in the town with premises that we could take Frank to. The only other alternatives left were the bar that he used to own, the store, the chapel, or one of our houses, and none of them seemed right. So, supervised by Lorna and Bill, a group of us lifted Frank and carried him the short distance to the jailhouse. He struggled less and less as we manhandled him along the street, and by the time that we arrived and put him down on a wooden bench in one of the two cells, all the fight seemed to have gone out of him. He just lay there breathing heavily while the makeshift party of concerned townsfolk dispersed. Lorna insisted on staying with Frank in the unlocked cell. I trailed after Bill to his office. I had no reason to be there apart from being badly shook up and wanting company, and Bill Monroe would have to do. He was mopping up some of the sweat from his face with a handkerchief that was already soaked wet through and making a phone call. I listened as he explained who he was and what had happened, and nodded in response to the person on the other end of the line. He had just finished the call when Lorna walked into the office. He told her, "The dispatcher said it'll be at least 2 hours before an ambulance can get here." Bill looked as if he was about to say more, but he ground to a halt. He had noticed the sadness on Lorna's face. She exhaled and said, "Frank has passed." Bill's shoulders slumped and I sat down heavily in a chair in the corner of his office. I think we both felt equally lost. Our neighbor who had been so full of life had been taken from us in such a sudden and shocking way. Lorna was clearly still thinking straight. She looked at Bill and said, "The paramedics will look after Frank's body when they arrive, but before they get here, we should take the handcuffs off. It's only right." Bill stared back at her blankly and showed no signs of moving. I guess he was so rattled he couldn't face going through to the cell and removing the handcuffs from Frank's body. Lorna held out her hand and said to him in a gentle voice, "It's okay, I'll do it." Bill gave her the keys and then sat with his head bowed until she returned. She put the handcuffs and key on the desk next to Bill and then said, we might as well be comfortable while we're waiting for the paramedics. Would you two like to come back to my house for some iced tea? My clothes were stuck to my skin with sweat and my mouth was parched. The idea of iced tea at Lorna's place was irresistible. I told her this, and Bill gave her a thumbs up, and the three of us set off. The heat shimmered in the street, and the skin on the back of my neck felt like it was burning. Thankfully, Lorna's place was already in sight. As we passed my house on the way, I noticed the bottle of beer that I had dropped lying on the ground and decided that I didn't have the strength to pick it up just then. I saw as well that Frank's front door was still open, and a fresh wave of sadness enveloped me as I wondered who would sort out the things that Frank had left behind. Frank had no family living in the town, but beyond that, I had no idea. I turned to Bill to ask him about Frank's next of kin, but Bill was staring back down the street at a figure walking slowly towards us. I saw who it was, and the heat of day fell away. Frank was shuffling unsteadily along. The dry blood of his self-inflicted wounds glistened darkly in the sunlight. His eyes were darker still. The sweat coating my skin felt like it had turned to ice, and I was starting to shiver violently as I said to Lorna, You made a mistake." Keeping her eyes fixed on Frank, she shook her head and replied, "The man that I left in the cell was dead. I swear on all my 30 years as a nurse that was the case. I do not know what's happening here, but it's wrong. It's against nature." I hugged myself as her words sunk in. I swallowed, desperately trying to get some moisture into my throat. I looked at Frank, at the thing that should not have been, and panic gripped me. He was coming closer. It was coming closer. And I could not move. I could not breathe. It was hot as hell in my hometown, and I was in a waking nightmare. The monster in my twisted reality opened its mouth, and a guttural groan escaped its lips. It shuffled closer, raised its arms, reaching out to me, and then its maw opened wide. Drool hung from its teeth. It was as if the rest of the world had drifted away from me and everything had focused in on the aberration that was bearing down on me. And then I heard a voice saying, "I need you to back off." I blinked, coming out of my daze, and turned and saw that Bill had his sidearm raised and aimed at the thing that Frank had become. "Please," Bill shouted. "I don't want to do this, but I will. I can't let you hurt anyone." The monster gazed at Bill. There was no humanity in its eyes. There was only rage as it threw itself at the deputy. A sharp sound made me flinch, and the monster's head was slammed backwards as a bullet struck. It fell to the ground. There was a sickening wound in the center of its forehead. Despite this, it was still twitching and clawing at the air and trying to bite, even though there was nothing in reach of its teeth. And then it grew still, and all the fire went out of its hideous gaze. Bill, Lorna, and I just looked at each other for a moment. I saw the shock that I was feeling reflected in their eyes. And then Bill began to shake his head. "Oh man," he said. "Oh man, I need to call this in." He holstered his sidearm, took out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly that it took him 3 goes to get the passcode right. And then he turned his back on us and walked away. I couldn't hear what was said after this, but it was an animated conversation on Bill's side. He was pointing and waving his free hand and pacing around. While he was lost in his phone call, people started to emerge cautiously from their houses. The sound of a weapon being discharged was not something that you rushed towards. I saw Mrs. Krinsky, who worked at the store, hovering by her husband's side with her hand over her mouth. Mr. Krinsky had been in the armed forces until shrapnel from an IED had shattered his kneecap, and he leaned heavily on his stick, frowning. Down the street, Jim Turner was standing framed in his doorway, blinking in the too bright light. Jim used to run an auto repair shop in town, but it had gone out of business, and now he was struggling to get by selling scrap metal and doing odd jobs where he could. Doc Wilson was out as well. He was on his porch, cradling a glass of amber liquid to his chest. There were plenty more folk joining them by now. A few had strayed as far as the street, and everybody was gawping at the figure lying on the ground. The fresh damage to its face was so bad that I wasn't sure if people would recognize that it was Frank's corpse. And if they did, I wondered if they would believe their own eyes. After all, wasn't Frank meant to be in the cell being taken care of by Lorna and the deputy? I looked back over at Bill, wishing that he would hurry up and finish his call. There would be a whole bunch of questions coming soon, and I had no answers. Finally, Bill lowered his phone and headed back. He looked around at the townsfolk and scowled. "You all need to get back inside," he said in a raised voice. "There is no danger to your health or your property, and this is a matter for the law to deal with." No one looked convinced, and Mr. Krinsky called back. "Look, Bill, none of us want to cause trouble, but there's something mighty wrong going on here." Bill glared at him, and I could see that he was fighting to keep his temper in check. He took a deep breath before replying. "I would have thought you of all people would respect the badge I'm wearing and do as you were being asked. So please." Bill left the request for Mr. Krinsky to shut up and go away hanging in the air. The veteran looked like he was going to stand his ground though, until his wife gently elbowed him in the ribs and began to lead him back inside. Bill glowered at him until he was gone, and then turned his gaze to the rest of the townsfolk who were still outside. There was plenty of muttering, but no more challenges to Bill's authority. As doors were pulled closed, Bill pinched the brow of his nose and sighed. He looked exhausted. Lorna put her hand on his arm and said, "You're doing just fine, Bill. What did the sheriff say? Are they sending help?" He nodded. "Yes, though I'm not sure they believed me when I told them what had happened. I reckon they think the heat has got to me." Lorna smiled sympathetically and then threw a look my way as she said, "We both saw the same thing, and we'll tell the sheriff you saved a life here today. Now let's get this body covered up for decency's sake and go and have that drink. If you don't get some liquid inside you, Bill Monroe, seeing things will be the least of your problems." Bill managed a small smile himself at this and trudged after her into her house. I followed, not wanting to be left alone with the corpse. Soon after, all I could think about was the glass of iced tea that Lorna gave me. The three of us were in her orderly kitchen, and the drink was the most wonderful, refreshing thing that had ever existed in my humble opinion. Bill looked a lot better once he had a drink as well, and he sounded calmer when he said, "Yeah, once the backup and the ambulance arrive, we can start to get things back to normal." "I'll drink to that," I said and raised my glass. Before it reached my lips, Lorna's door flew open and Mrs. Krinsky ran inside. "My husband, there's something wrong with him." Lorna reacted first. She took Mrs. Krinsky's hands in hers and said, "Tell us what happened." "He was very quiet when we got inside. I thought he was angry with me for intervening and telling him to stop being so dang cranky. But he just stood there staring into space. It was like I wasn't there, and then he collapsed." She began to sob as she went on. "I thought that I had lost him out there in the desert. When he came home, he promised me that we would grow old together. Please, you have to help." "We will," Lorna said with remarkable calmness. I was aware of the hum of her AC, of the clock on her kitchen wall ticking quietly, of my heart beating. It was too loud, too quick. I put my hand on my chest, and then I heard the scream. We all did. And I think we all knew that it was coming from the Krinsky's house. Knew that it was Mr. Krinsky who was howling in primal fear and pain, not an animal. Lorna looked at me and Bill and said, I'll stay with her, you two go. Reluctantly, I followed Bill, who was already hurrying out of the kitchen. I kept behind him as he ran towards the Krinsky's place. I wasn't a deputy, and there was no way that I was going to be the first one through that door. I could see Bill standing in the kitchen as I crossed the threshold. Mr. Krinsky was on the floor close by, screaming and clawing at his skin. Bill reached for his belt where he kept his handcuffs and then cursed. He had left them back at the jailhouse. And so he grabbed Krinsky's wrists and struggled to pin them to the ground. "Help me," he yelled. I moved around them both and pressed down on Krinsky's shoulders. Blood running from the wounds that Krinsky had gouged into his face, mingled with foam bubbling from his mouth. I was worried that he would choke, worried that we wouldn't be able to hold him. But we did manage to keep him from hurting himself anymore, and slowly he seemed to calm down. Eventually, he stopped struggling altogether. "It's gonna be okay, there's help on the way," Bill said, trying to reassure him. Krinsky stared up. His eyes were wide with terror as he whispered in a hoarse voice, "It's inside me. I have to get it out." "What's inside you?" Bill asked. Krinsky replied with a single word, "Evil." And then he died. Bill let go of him and moved away, and I did the same. I needed to get out of there, and I started towards the door. But Bill held up a hand. "Wait. We need to make sure Krinsky is not going to attack anyone if he comes back like Frank did." It should have been a crazy thought, not something that rational people believed, but I did not challenge Bill. "You're going to use your sidearm," I began, thinking this was what he had meant, but he shook his head. "I can't desecrate a dead body no matter what. No, we'll tie him up good and proper, make sure if something does stir, it can't go anywhere." And then he pulled over a kitchen chair and asked me to get Krinsky's body into it. The idea of touching it repulsed me, but once again, I had to do the right thing. The body was still warm and slick with sweat as we wrapped our arms around it and lifted it onto the chair. Between us, we found belts and rope and tore up blankets and fixed them around the corpse. A disgusting job, but it was done, and finally we could get out of there. There was a key inside the door, and Bill took it and locked up on the way out. As we headed back to Lorna's house, I had to force myself not to look back over my shoulder. Despite everything that we had done, I could not escape the feeling that if I did look around, I would see Mr. Krinsky shuffling unsteadily along the street. Alongside me, Bill was on his phone making a call. Well, trying to anyway. He cursed and then said, "I need to update the sheriff, but I can't get through. I've got no signal on my phone." I checked mine and it was the same, and I had no idea why. We were arriving back at Lorna's house by now. When we walked through the open door, Mrs. Krinsky was sitting at the kitchen table. She shot to her feet and asked, "Where's my husband?" Bill said in a quiet voice, "I'm sorry." Lorna sat next to Mrs. Krinsky and began to speak to her quietly, trying to console her. Bill was trying his phone again without success from the look on his face. I hugged myself. I couldn't cope with this. I wanted to crawl into a darkened room and curl up in a corner and sleep for a long time. But there was to be no hiding place, no escape. There was a scream from somewhere in the distance, a scream born of terror and hurt. And there was someone outside Lorna's kitchen window as well. It was Jim Turner. He was looking through the window at us. He looked puzzled though, as if what he was seeing made no sense to him. He put the open palm of his hand against the glass. Trying to keep himself from falling, I realized, as Jim slumped forward against the window. He was still for a few seconds and then he began to scream. His spittle struck the glass as he screamed, and I felt sick knowing that, in the seconds that followed, he would start trying to pull his own skin off in a crazed attempt to get rid of the evil within him. But Jim did not dig his fingernails into his flesh. He started to smash his hands against the kitchen window again and again. Cracks appeared, and still he hammered at it, and the cracks widened. A shard of glass came free. Jim grabbed it and placed a viciously sharp edge against the skin on his face, and he began to cut. I turned away. I couldn't watch. I put my hands on my ears, desperately trying to block out the sound of his screams. I couldn't though, they were too loud. I began to sob and say to myself, "Oh, please stop, please." And Jim's screams did end. I lifted my hands free of my ears and listened for the distant scream that had preceded Jim's, but I couldn't hear anything. Whoever that had been had stopped as well. It was silence once more. I looked around the room. The broken glass that remained in the window was smeared with blood. Lorna and Mrs. Krinsky were huddled in a corner hugging each other in a protective embrace. Bill was staring wide-eyed with fear at the door. And the thing that had been Jim Turner was dragging itself into the kitchen on its hands and knees. It looked to have sliced the skin off its own face and then cut deeper still. I could see bone in its grotesque visage. One eye was gone and gouged out, and the socket shone with blood. The other eye remained. It was darker than any night. Bill aimed his sidearm at the monster. His hand was shaking, and I thought, he's going to miss. But his aim was true. The monster slumped to the ground, its fingers reached out, and a low groan drifted from its lips, and then it was done. Bill wiped his hand across his forehead and said, "Lorna, where's your landline? I'm going to call 911. "Through in the front room," she replied, and took Bill through to show him. They returned a minute later. "Now the landline's down as well," Bill said. "I'm going to the jailhouse to use the radio. We are seriously in need of the cavalry." He headed for the door, and Lorna and Mrs. Krinsky started to follow him. "No way," I thought. "We need to stay together and wait here," I protested. "Krinsky's still out there, and he will have to become one of those things." His wife looked at me, and I could see the raw pain in her eyes at my words. And then she turned away from me and caught up with the others as they walked away, leaving me alone and feeling like dirt. I still wanted to stay put, but I couldn't face being on my own. I did not have any pride left to swallow at this point, and so I hurried out of the door, to find that they had halted in the street. I could see why straight away. Through the heat haze, I could make out a figure shuffling uncertainly down the street. I thought that it was Krinsky at first, and that he had freed himself from his bonds as I had feared. But it was not Krinsky. Mitch Groves had bought the bar from Frank, and he had moved from the East Coast to realize his dream of running a bar in a small town. He was going to serve homemade food, and there would be a warm welcome for everyone. His dream had descended into this. He had become a monster consumed by rage, shuffling along a dusty street on a brutal summer's day. We stood and watched it. The sight of its mutilated face and dark eyes made my skin crawl. Lorna and Mrs. Krinsky moved closer to each other. Bill drew his sidearm and he fired. It fell as the others had done. It reached out one last time, and then the street was still, silent, until a new scream made me flinch. A second followed in its wake, and moments later a third and then a fourth. I could not see who was screaming or tell exactly where they were coming from. None of us could. And the screams continued to multiply until they seemed to be coming from everywhere. We were transfixed by this hideous chorus until Bill shouted, "Run! We have to get to the jailhouse before they turn." I did not need telling twice. I started to run, and Bill and Lorna did the same. But Mrs. Krinsky was rooted to the spot. She was captivated by the sight of the figure stumbling out of her house. It had been her husband once. Now it was a creature that had escaped from the grip of death. If the Reaper could not hold it, why did Bill and I think belts and rags could? I thought with a bitter sigh. The monster shuffled uncertainly forwards across the porch and down onto the street. It was repulsive, but Mrs. Krinsky seemed blind to this. On this strangest of all days, I think she was seeing the man that she loved. Bill yelled at her, "We need to go." But Mrs. Krinsky ignored him, and she was crying tears of joy. Bill swore and ran towards her, and he had his sidearm, but he could not use it because of the risk of hurting her. Mrs. Krinsky held her arms out to embrace her husband. A smile spread across the monster's face. Its mouth opened and drool dripped from its teeth, and Mrs. Krinsky paused. I think the mask of her delusions must have been ripped away because she cried out in fear. It was too late, though. The monster was on her, and it was sinking its teeth into the flesh of her shoulder and biting deep. Bill reached them, and he grabbed the monster by its scalp and neck and tried to pull it away. "Help me," he yelled. Lorna and I sprinted forwards. The monster still had its teeth buried in Mrs. Krinsky's flesh and was shaking her body like she was a rag doll. There was blood everywhere, and it was spraying from the edges of the wound. Lorna began to strike the monster on the side of its head with her fist to try to make it let go. I took a hold of one of its arms and tried to pull it away, but only the monster was too strong for us. We could not stop it biting, could not stop it tearing a lump of flesh free and beginning to devour it. As it ate, it lashed out with its arms at us. It swatted us away like we were flies, and the three of us ended up on the ground. Mrs. Krinsky, released from its jaws, sunk to her knees and then toppled over. She lay sprawled on her side. Blood no longer spurted from the gaping wound in her shoulder. I had seen enough crime shows on TV to know what that meant. She was dead. Lorna linked her hand in mine and said, "We need to save ourselves now." Bill was pushing himself painfully to his feet. The monster was too busy gorging itself to notice the barrel being pointed at it. "Eat lead," Bill muttered and pulled the trigger. And then he turned and muttered in obscenity. I looked down the street and I echoed his curse. The screaming had stopped and the monsters had emerged. There were scores of them. They shuffled uncertainly along the sidewalks and down the road. They came out of buildings and groaned in the glare of the ceaseless sunlight. When they were alive, I could have put a name to every single one of them. But now I saw a disfigured horde of the dead that blocked the way. "We're not going to make it to the jailhouse," I said. Bill snapped back. "Oh, tell me something I don't know, genius." I looked around, desperately trying to find a way clear where we could try and escape. But the dead were everywhere that I could see. This was their town now, their domain. Thomas Allen had been a volunteer at the chapel. He swept the floor and brought flowers from his garden to place in vases for the services. His reanimated corpse was at the front of the horde. It was a dozen feet from us. I waited for Bill to aim and fire and to take it out, but Bill's arms were by his side. He was shaking his head. "It's over," he said. "There are too many of them." We all have our limits, and it looked like Bill had reached his. He was a broken man with seconds left to live. The monster was reaching out to Bill, opening its mouth. Bill's shoulders started to shake as he began to sob, and the sound of a shot filled the air. The thing that had been Thomas Allen spiraled backwards. The top of its skull was lost in a cloud of crimson. The monster just behind it suffered the same fate moments later. I span around. Doc Wilson was sitting on a rocking chair on his porch with a bottle of bourbon in one hand and a long-barreled weapon in the other. "I'm gonna take myself a drink before I reload, so if you folks want to head this way and join me, now would be a good time." Bill snapped out of his daze and the three of us sprinted for Doc Wilson's place. The monsters had paused for a moment to peer at the remains of their grotesque kin, but now they were on the move again. A sickening moan was escaping their curled back lips. As we reached his porch, Doc Wilson grinned and said, "I think I made him angry." And then his eyes narrowed and he growled, "Good." He slugged a bourbon from the bottle, loosed another couple of barrels, dispatched 2 more of the things, and then said, "Follow me." We followed him inside and he slammed and bolted his door. Without being asked, Bill started to drag a table over to block the door. "We need to board the windows up as well," Lorna said. Doc Wilson shook his head. "No time, the safest place is my cellar." And then he looked over at Bill, who was by the window picking up a chair for the barricade that he seemed intent on making. Doc Wilson yelled at him, "Get away from there." I don't know if Bill ever heard. The windows smashed and the dead reached through. Bill flinched and tried to get away, but the monsters had him in their grip. He cried out as they pulled him through the shattered glass, and then they fell on him in a frenzy. Bill was lost to sight, but I could see the monsters struggling over each other to reach their feast. "The cellar now," Doc Wilson yelled. "We can't help the deputy." I turned and followed him towards the cellar door. Lorna hesitated for a moment. Her face was streaked with tears. "Goodbye, my friend," she said quietly, and then hurried after us. Doc Wilson ushered me through the cellar door first, with Lorna on my heels. I heard the door being slammed behind me and it became too dark for me to see the stairs. I stumbled on, expecting to trip and go tumbling down at any moment, but I made it to level ground. It was darker than ever down there. To one side of me I heard Doc Wilson cussing and then saying, "Oh, there you are." A couple of seconds later, a glow appeared. It grew until I could see Doc Wilson's face. He was smiling and holding a large flashlight. "It is clockwork," he said. "Ideal when the authorities have left you high and dry." "What do you mean?" I asked. "There's no phone signal," he answered. "My landline's dead, the internet is down, and the electricity has been cut off. We've been isolated by the powers that be, so nobody can find out what's happening in this town." I had seen him drinking, and now we were in the claustrophobic cellar that I could smell the booze on his breath. And even if I hadn't, everybody knew that Doc Wilson was a hopeless drunk. The man was talking nonsense, and I needed him to see sense. "Look, Doc," I said, "Deputy Monroe called for help, and I'm sure they will be here soon. We just need to sit tight and wait for the authorities to come rescue us." He snorted with derision. "Listen to me, you fool. It's the authorities who are responsible. They tax us, they steal our personal information from our computers and phones. They put chemicals in our water, release viruses into the air, sneak subliminal messages into the information overload that surrounds us every day. We're lab rats to them, and what is happening out there is an experiment gone wrong. Now the authorities are locking this town down, and they're going to cover up this incident like they've covered up so many times before." I counted to 10 before replying in the firmest voice that I could. "That is conspiracy theory nonsense spread by people who spend too long online." Lit by the glow of his clockwork flashlight, a sad smile spread across Doc Wilson's booze-ravaged features. "If it is nonsense, why are we hiding in my cellar from crazed zombies that used to be our neighbors?" I opened my mouth to answer, but I had no answer. I had only fear as the sound of hammering on the cellar door reached me. I could hear footsteps overhead as well. The monsters who were not trying to break down the door must have been pacing up and down the floor above us, I figured. We were not safe in the cellar, we were trapped, besieged. And surely it was only a matter of time before the cellar door gave and the monsters poured down the stairs, and fresh slaughter was unleashed. Or before they found a broken floorboard and pried it free. They must have known there was living flesh close by, warm flesh running with blood that they could almost taste. Directly above my head I heard wood crack, and the hammering on the cellar door intensified. Dang critters sure are keen," Doc Wilson muttered. He was over by the shelves that lined one wall of his cellar from floor to ceiling. I saw that they were loaded with canned food and bottle after bottle of booze. He noticed me staring at him. "My personal stockpile for the end times," he said. "And though the rest of the country's probably going about its business as usual and wishing it was time to leave work or watching the afternoon soaps, in our small corner of the USA, it's time to open a fresh bottle of 40% proof." Lorna had been listening quietly, but now she spoke out. "We can all have a drink later, but let's find a way out of here first." He looked at the bottle's side and said, "There's a metal grill over there at the top of that wall. Hasn't been opened in years and will be a mighty tight squeeze, but you're welcome to try, if you think there's still the chance of getting away from those things." Lorna's determined expression was the only answer required. Doc Wilson found a rusty screwdriver and hammering trailing spiderwebs from its handle on another shelf. He and Lorna got to work trying to force the grill. From the top of the stairs, the sound of wood splintering as the assault on the door continued was cascading down. And directly above me, I could hear fingers scrabbling at the ceiling and feet stamping in a frantic beat. We were almost out of time. "Hurry up," I yelled, and then I heard a crack close by and the scraping of metal against metal. They had opened the grill. Lorna whooped in triumph and then said, "All I can see through the gap is overgrown grass, but that might give us some cover." She did not wait for a reply from either of us and pulled herself up and out. The soles of her shoes were the last thing I saw as she slipped from sight. Doc Wilson waved me forwards and I breathed my gut in, struggled through and found myself in the backyard. Lorna was crouched down and was almost hidden by these sprawling weeds. There was an ancient car tire there as well. Guess the doc was too busy preparing for the end of the world to spend time tidying up his backyard, I said with a crooked smile on my face as I untangled my limbs into a sitting position. Lorna ignored my attempted humor and shouted into the open grill, "What are you waiting for, Doc?" I couldn't see him, but I could hear Doc Wilson clearly enough as he said, "I haven't helped anyone since my medical license was revoked, and it feels good to have helped you too. I'm going to keep on doing that by making a stand. Hopefully that will buy you a little time, and hopefully you will think better of me. I was a good man once." Lorna looked like she was going to try and reason with Doc Wilson, but through the open grill, I could suddenly hear the rumble of the monsters' voices. They must have broken through the cellar door and were crowding into the cellar. 2 shots broke through the guttural groans. 2 only. In my mind's eye, I saw the monsters enveloping Doc Wilson and fighting with each other to bite and feed while their hideous faces became soaked with his blood. Lorna was on her feet. "He's gone. Let's go." She kept hunched over as she scurried forwards, trying to use the cover of the overgrown backyard, I figured. I pushed myself to my feet and stood a little straighter so that I could scan the horizon. I couldn't see any monsters between the doc's backyard and the open patch of land that led into the woods that bordered the town here. I didn't believe all the changed townsfolk had pursued us into the cellar, though. There must be more out there, I thought. They are close, about to attack. "Get down," Lorna implored, breaking the runaway train of my thoughts. I flinched, crouched, and stumbled after her until I was alongside her, but she was still looking back in the direction of Doc Wilson's house. At the open grill where the first of the monsters was crawling out after us, fresh blood had stained its mouth and chin. "They are never going to give up," Lorna muttered grimly and turned away. Half a dozen clumsy steps later, and we were leaving Frank's backyard and breaking cover into open ground. I looked back over my shoulder. Monsters were streaming out of the cellar and shuffling our way. I glanced to my left. The other monsters had appeared from in between the houses, and it was the same to my right. They were converging in on us, a tidal wave of ravenous, murderous freaks. Eyes once more straight ahead, I ran as fast as I could for the woods. Lorna was 3 paces ahead of me. The trees were coming closer. We were almost there. Not that we would be out of danger when we made it to the woods, but we would no longer be so exposed. and about a mile away there was a road that cut through the woods that was busy with haulage trucks. We could flag down help. We would be saved. What was a mile, I figured? It was nothing. Even though my lungs were burning and the stitch in my chest was agonizing, I was going to make it. We were going to make it. Lorna was within touching distance of the trees and I was right behind. And then suddenly I was falling and my foot was twisting under me. Fresh pain flared in my leg. I tumbled to the ground, rolled, and grabbed my ankle and cried out. Lorna appeared at my side, grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. The weight of my injured ankle made me yell in pain. "Oh, deal with it," Lorna told me, and she was right. Gritting my teeth, I ran on into the forest. Lorna kept by my side. There were rustling sounds behind us and sharp cracks as fallen branches were stepped on. The monsters were in the woods and on our trail. We ran on through the half-light of the woods, weaving through the trees. Clouds of bugs in the humid undergrowth swarmed around us and birds shrieked overhead. Low-lying branches scratched my face and hands as I sprinted faster and faster. My ankle was numb by now and I had given up spitting out the bugs that were ending up in my mouth. The world was a blur around me. Apart from Lorna, who was saying, "We're almost there," over and over. I believed in her. She had shown so much strength since this madness had begun. Even so, when we emerged from the trees and found ourselves in the open standing on the tarmac, I was shocked. The cacophony of the woods was gone. The sunlight was blinding. I shielded my eyes and gazed down the road. It stretched out ahead of us. I waited for a truck to roar into view so that we could flag them down and be saved. But the road in front of us was deserted and there were no sounds of any engines in the distance. I turned. The emptiness, the silence continued. And in a matter of minutes, the monsters would catch up. They would come crashing out of the woods. "We can't stay here," I said. "We're meat for the dead." "No, wait, I can see something." I followed her gaze and I could see it as well. There was a vehicle coming over the horizon. It was a dark shape and it was traveling at speed. Heartbeats later, I could make out that it was a car. It was our ride out of here. I moved into the middle of the road and began to wave my arms. The car slowed and came to a halt. I lowered my arms and grinned at Lorna in relief. She smiled back as the driver and the passenger in the front seat climbed out and stood by the open doors. Both wore dark suits and shades. "Boy, are we pleased to see you," I said. "We need a ride out of here really bad. We can explain in the car." I started towards the back door, but the driver lifted his jacket to reveal a badge and holster. He said in a gravelly voice, "Federal agents, this is now a restricted zone and you two are detained." "What the?" I began to say. The passenger cut me off by shouting, "You will do what you're told." He moved towards me and produced a pair of handcuffs. "You don't understand. We're all in danger if we stay here." But he wasn't listening to me. He grabbed my wrist, and Lorna said, "They are here." Everything seemed to slow then. The passenger was opening up the handcuffs and the driver was watching. There was a sneer on his face. I turned away from both of them and looked back at the edge of the woods, where dark eyes glinted with malevolent intent. Through the corner of my eye, I was aware that Lorna was inching away from the monsters. I forced myself to do the same. The passenger did not try and stop me. He was staring at the monsters as they shuffled into the light. He looked like he had frozen with the shock. The monsters were a vision conjured from the darkest of places, and he was seeing them for the first time. So was the driver, but he was reacting by reaching into his holster. He unleashed a volley and the nearest monsters fell. They were a repulsive drop in an ocean of pain. Dozens more scrambled over the fallen bodies of their kin and threw themselves at the driver, drawn to him like scavengers to roadkill. The passenger finally came out of his daze and he drew. He took out one monster before he was overwhelmed. I saw his mouth open, but he didn't try to cry out in fear. One of the monsters had his throat gripped in its teeth, and it tore a chunk of flesh free. The passenger's final few moments of life were spent in mute terror, and the driver was lost to sight altogether under a groaning, writhing mass of the animated dead. And the monsters on the edge of the slaughter were turning to me. I looked around for Lorna, panicked again when I couldn't see her. But then I heard the car's engine kick into life and I saw that she was behind the wheel. "Get in!" And I did not need a second invitation. I made it into the passenger seat and was still pulling the door closed behind me as Lorna sped off. There was a monster in the road directly in front of us. It raised its arms and showed its drool-laced teeth. Lorna accelerated. The monster was thrown up by the impact, struck the windscreen, and then rolled away. I twisted around and looked through the back window. The monster that we had hit was struggling to its feet, and behind it, the rest of our former neighbors were shuffling along the road. One of them was holding a spine that had been stripped clean of flesh in its hand and dragging it along the ground. By my side, Lorna said, "There's no way they can catch us." The open road lay ahead of us. That should have meant the way was clear for us to find help from the authorities. Only 2 federal agents had just tried arresting us. I asked Lorna, "Do you think it's true what Doc Wilson said about the town being locked down to cover up a secret experiment?" Keeping her eyes fixed on the road, Lorna replied, "I honestly wish I could say no, but I just don't know anymore. If death is no longer the end of a physical form, then anything is possible. This is no longer the land of the free. It's the land of chaos and fear and unspeakable horror." As I considered her words, the sound of a helicopter filled the sky. A voice from above, distorted, crackled at us. "This is a restricted zone. Pull over to the side of the road." Lorna swore a stream of obscenities which translated as, "No way am I going to do that." I didn't think we had a choice. The road continued straight ahead and we could not outrun a helicopter, especially one where the crew had zero patience. It crackled overhead again. "Halt immediately or we will deploy fatal force." Lorna cussed again and turned the wheel sharply. The car left the road and we began plummeting through the woods, heading further away from our hometown. The sound of trees being shredded as the helicopter crew made good on their promise followed us as we jolted and rattled deeper into the undergrowth. Lorna swerved the wheel crazily to left and right to avoid tree trunks in our path, and I was convinced we were going to come crashing to a halt at any moment. A sickening jolt proved me right. The car had struck a tree. The front bonnet was trashed and smoke spiraled into the air. We both threw our doors open and started to stumble away. I had no idea where we were until we once more emerged from the woods. We were standing alongside the highway which had skirted our hometown. There was a small turnoff which took you into town. The highway was usually packed with fast-moving traffic, but at that moment in time, it was gridlocked in the direction of our hometown. The opposite lanes were empty. We stepped out of the woods close by a truck, and the driver was standing by his vehicle smoking a cigarette and scowling at the screen of a phone. He was a big guy with a beard and tattoos that ran up the side of his neck. Lorna approached him and asked, "What's happening?" The authorities have shut the road in both directions. They're saying there's been an explosion and the public needs to be kept away until the area is made safe. It's hogwash if you ask me." Lorna glanced at me and I could tell that we were thinking the same thing. Doc Wilson had been right. We were all pawns in a sick game being played by the powers that be. Until a few hours ago, on a sleepy summer's day in our hometown, we had believed that we were safe. Now we knew the truth. And this is my warning to you. Watch out for the signs because danger's close. Fear your neighbor and get ready to run.